The first thing that betrays the danger is how harmless the pufferfish looks as it drifts through shallow coastal waters, hovering above sand flats and coral rubble with the lazy confidence of an animal that has nothing left to prove, its round body bobbing gently with the movement of the tide, its large eyes scanning the reef more out of curiosity than fear, and its small mouth perpetually shaped into something that looks suspiciously like a smile. In tropical lagoons and temperate shorelines alike, pufferfish occupy a strange ecological niche where visibility is high, predators are abundant, and escape routes are limited, yet they move openly, often during daylight hours, without the frantic vigilance displayed by more vulnerable fish. This apparent boldness is not arrogance but chemistry, a biological strategy so effective that it has reshaped the entire predator-prey dynamic around the animal, allowing a slow, awkward swimmer to survive in environments that would otherwise punish hesitation. The pufferfish does not rely on speed, camouflage, or aggression. Instead, it relies on a molecular weapon so potent that a quantity smaller than a grain of sand can stop the electrical language of the human nervous system while leaving the mind awake and aware of its own shutdown. Tetrodotoxin is not a poison that overwhelms the body through chaos or inflammation, nor does it destroy cells or tissues in a dramatic fashion, because its lethality comes from precision rather than violence. At the cellular level, nerve cells communicate through controlled electrical signals that travel along membranes by allowing sodium ions to flow through specialized channels, and these channels act as microscopic gates that open and close in exact patterns, translating chemical gradients into movement, sensation, breathing, and heartbeat. Tetrodotoxin fits into these sodium channels like a perfectly shaped key that locks the gate permanently shut, preventing sodium ions from entering the nerve cell, which in turn stops the electrical signal from propagating. Muscles do not contract because the signal never arrives. Reflexes disappear, not because the brain fails, but because the message cannot travel, and breathing slows and eventually ceases as the diaphragm and chest muscles fall silent, even though the brain remains fully conscious, aware, and capable of perceiving panic, suffocation, and the progressive loss of bodily control. This is what makes tetrodotoxin uniquely terrifying from a physiological perspective, because unlike many neurotoxins that cause confusion, delirium, or loss of consciousness early in exposure, tetrodotoxin leaves the mind intact while stripping the body of its ability to respond. Victims often report tingling around the lips and fingertips as one of the earliest symptoms, a subtle warning that nerve transmission is beginning to fail, followed by numbness spreading across the face and limbs, muscle weakness that feels like exhaustion rather than pain, and then a creeping heaviness that makes even lifting the head impossible. As paralysis deepens, the ability to speak disappears, then the ability to swallow, and finally the ability to breathe, all while consciousness remains, because tetrodotoxin does not cross the blood-brain barrier easily, meaning the brain itself continues functioning even as the rest of the nervous system is silenced. Death, when it occurs, is caused by respiratory failure, not because the lungs are damaged, but because the muscles required to draw air into them can no longer receive instructions, turning the body into a fully aware prison that can neither move nor cry out. The pufferfish does not manufacture tetrodotoxin on its own, which is a detail often misunderstood even by people who consume it, because the toxin originates from symbiotic bacteria living within the fish's tissues, particularly in the liver, ovaries, intestines, and skin. These bacteria, belonging to several genera, including Vibrio and Pseudomonas, produce tetrodotoxin as a metabolic byproduct, and the fish accumulates it through diet and microbial colonization rather than internal synthesis. This relationship transforms the pufferfish into a mobile reservoir of poison, one whose toxicity can vary depending on habitat, diet, season, and even individual health, making it impossible to determine safety through appearance alone. Two pufferfish of the same species, caught in the same region, can differ drastically in toxin concentration, which is why attempts to standardize preparation outside tightly controlled systems repeatedly fail. From an ecological standpoint, tetrodotoxin reshapes interactions far beyond human encounters. Because predators that attempt to consume pufferfish quickly learn, through often fatal trial and error, that this prey item is not merely unpalatable, but lethal. Some predators, such as certain sharks and large reef fish, may survive minor exposure and learn avoidance behaviors, while others die outright, creating a strong selective pressure that reinforces the pufferfish's visibility rather than discouraging it. Bright patterns, distinctive shapes, and slow movement become signals rather than vulnerabilities, advertising danger instead of hiding from it, which allows the pufferfish to occupy open habitats without constant flight. This chemical defense also permits energy allocation away from muscular development and toward reproduction and growth, which explains why pufferfish invest heavily in egg production and elaborate mating behaviors rather than escape mechanics. The iconic inflation behavior of the pufferfish, often misunderstood as its primary defense, is actually secondary to tetrodotoxin and serves a more immediate mechanical function. When threatened, the pufferfish rapidly gulps water or air, expanding its highly elastic stomach and transforming its body into a rigid sphere covered in spines, which makes it difficult or impossible for predators to swallow. This buys time rather than guarantees safety, because inflation alone does not stop a determined predator from inflicting damage. But combined with toxic tissues, it creates a lethal trap for any animal that attempts to bite or consume it. Even partial ingestion can be fatal, because tetrodotoxin does not require digestion to enter the bloodstream, as it can be absorbed through mucous membranes and wounds almost immediately. Humans, however, represent a different category of predator, one that does not learn avoidance through evolutionary timescales, but through culture, myth, and sometimes tragedy. In several countries, particularly Japan, pufferfish has been transformed from ecological warning sign into culinary challenge, where the danger itself becomes part of the appeal. Known as fugu, pufferfish meat is consumed in thin slices arranged with artistic precision, often served raw or lightly cooked, with the promise that proper preparation removes the poison while preserving the experience. This belief, however, oversimplifies both the biology of tetrodotoxin and the skill required to manage it, because the toxin is not evenly distributed, not predictable, and not neutralized by heat, freezing, or chemical treatment. Cooking does not destroy tetrodotoxin because the molecule is heat stable and remains intact at temperatures far exceeding those used in food preparation, meaning that safety depends entirely on physically removing all toxic tissues without contaminating edible flesh. The margin for error in this process is vanishingly small, because the difference between a harmless portion and a lethal dose can be measured in micrograms, a scale so fine that even trace contamination from a knife blade or cutting surface can be fatal. Licensed fugu chefs undergo years of training and rigorous testing to learn the precise anatomy of the fish, the location of toxin-rich organs, and the techniques required to isolate edible muscle without rupture or spread. Even with this training, deaths still occur, often because toxin levels vary unpredictably or because human error cannot be fully eliminated when dealing with a compound that does not forgive mistakes. Amateur preparation, whether by untrained cooks or adventurous tourists, dramatically increases the risk because no amount of visual inspection, taste testing, or confidence can reveal the presence of tetrodotoxin once it has entered the food. Tourism culture amplifies this danger by reframing risk as authenticity, encouraging travelers to seek out real experiences that involve consuming foods known to be dangerous, as though survival itself were proof of cultural immersion. This narrative ignores the biological reality that tetrodotoxin does not care about tradition, bravery, or intent, and that the fish itself does not distinguish between ceremonial preparation and reckless handling. In some regions, illegal preparation persists despite bans, driven by demand from diners who believe that small amounts of poison produce a pleasant tingling sensation without lethal consequences. This sensation, often described as mild numbness or euphoria, is not a controlled effect, but the earliest stage of neurotoxic exposure, and its presence indicates that the toxin has already begun interfering with nerve function, meaning the difference between thrill and death is no longer under conscious control. From an evolutionary perspective, the irony is stark, because tetrodotoxin evolved as a deterrent precisely because it is unforgiving, reliable, and indifferent to dosage miscalculations made by predators. It is not designed to teach moderation or allow survival after sampling, but to impose absolute consequences that shape behavior through elimination rather than negotiation. Humans, by attempting to tame this toxin through culinary tradition, are engaging in a cultural gamble against a molecular system that has remained unchanged for millions of years, because the selective pressures that created tetrodotoxin favor stability, not adaptability. The toxin does not degrade easily, does not lose potency through cooking, and does not announce its presence through taste or smell, which means it bypasses nearly every sensory safeguard humans rely on to evaluate food safety. What makes the pufferfish particularly unsettling is not just that it carries tetrodotoxin, but that it does so while appearing approachable, even charming, occupying shallow waters frequented by swimmers, snorkelers, and fishers who may not recognize the danger beneath its rounded form. Handling a pufferfish, even without consuming it, can be hazardous because tetrodotoxin is present in the skin and can enter the body through cuts or mucous membranes, making improper handling risky in ways that are not immediately obvious. In this sense, the pufferfish represents a broader ecological lesson about how evolution often hides its most effective weapons behind misleading signals, exploiting assumptions rather than confronting them directly. Seen within its ecosystem, the pufferfish is not a monster, but a masterpiece of biochemical adaptation, a living demonstration of how survival does not always favor strength or speed, but precision and inevitability. Tetrodotoxin allows the fish to occupy exposed niches, reproduce successfully, and deter predation without constant vigilance, shaping reef communities by removing certain predators from the system entirely. For humans, the danger lies not in encountering the pufferfish itself, but in misunderstanding the nature of its defense, believing that tradition, skill, or bravery can override a toxin whose evolutionary purpose is to end encounters decisively. The pufferfish does not challenge you to test your limits. It simply exists, carrying a molecule that shuts down the body while leaving the mind awake. A reminder that some meals are only cute until the moment they stop your breathing. In shallow tropical waters where sand, coral rubble, and broken shell fragments merge into a chaotic mosaic, the stonefish does not announce itself as a predator or a threat, because its entire survival strategy is built around the assumption that nothing, including humans, will recognize it as alive at all. It lies motionless on the seabed, its body contorted into irregular lumps and ridges that mimic eroded rock, algae-covered coral, or discarded debris, while fine grains of sand settle into the grooves of its skin and microalgae cling to its surface, completing an illusion so precise that even experienced fishers can stare directly at it without registering danger. This is not passive camouflage born from stillness alone, but an active evolutionary design shaped by environments where visibility is high, encounters are frequent, and mistakes are punished immediately. The stonefish thrives exactly where people work, wade, anchor, cast nets, and haul lines, turning everyday human activity into a collision with one of the most efficient venom delivery systems in the ocean. Unlike fast-moving reef predators that rely on pursuit or ambush from cover, the stonefish has evolved into a living landmine, one whose threat is triggered not by intent, but by contact. Its body is heavy and compressed, built to sit low against the substrate, with pectoral fins that spread outward like broken slabs of stone and dorsal spines that rise subtly along its back, each one capable of injecting venom with mechanical certainty. These spines are not sharp by accident, but engineered to penetrate skin under pressure, meaning that stepping, grabbing, kneeling, or even compressing the fish inside a fishing net activates the weapon. The stonefish does not need to strike or chase, because its venom apparatus is pressure activated, turning the reflexive human response to steady oneself, lift an object, or clear a net into the very action that delivers the toxin. The venom itself is a complex cocktail of proteins, enzymes, and neurotoxic compounds designed to cause immediate, overwhelming physiological disruption. When a spine punctures the skin, venom glands at its base release toxins that spread rapidly through local tissues, causing intense pain that victims often describe as unbearable, radiating, and escalating rather than fading with time. This pain is not merely a sensory experience, but a neurological overload, as the venom interferes with nerve signaling, muscle control, and cardiovascular stability, leading to symptoms that include swelling, tissue necrosis, muscle weakness, nausea, and in severe cases, systemic shock. The speed at which these effects appear is what makes stonefish encounters particularly dangerous, because the body has little time to mount a compensatory response before function begins to degrade. From an ecological perspective, the stonefish's venom evolved not primarily as a defensive tool against humans, but as a dual-purpose adaptation that serves both predation and protection. As an ambush predator, the stonefish feeds on small fish and crustaceans that wander too close, using rapid mouth expansion to create a vacuum that pulls prey in faster than the eye can follow. Remaining motionless for extended periods allows it to conserve energy while maintaining readiness, a strategy well suited to environments where food availability fluctuates and competition is intense. The same spines that deter large predators also discourage accidental contact from animals that might otherwise trample or displace the fish, ensuring that its position remains stable and its camouflage intact. What makes the stonefish particularly hazardous to humans is the mismatch between its evolutionary niche and human behavior in coastal ecosystems. Fishermen often work barefoot or with minimal protection in shallow waters, relying on tactile feedback to navigate nets, lines, and catches, while recreational swimmers and snorkelers assume that danger announces itself through movement or visibility. The stonefish exploits these assumptions without intention because it has no need to flee or warn. It simply exists in spaces where human hands and feet routinely go. When a fisherman hauls a net and feels what seems like a rock or coral lump tangled in mesh, the instinctive response is to grab and pull, applying exactly the pressure required to drive spines deep into flesh. On boats, where catches are sorted quickly and surfaces are cluttered, a stonefish can be mistaken for debris until someone attempts to clear it, triggering envenomation in an environment far from immediate medical assistance. This is why stonefish rank among the most common causes of accidental envenomation requiring hospitalization in tropical regions, not because they are aggressive or abundant everywhere, but because they intersect so frequently with routine human activity. Unlike sharks or large venomous snakes, which tend to avoid humans or require deliberate provocation, stonefish injuries occur during normal tasks performed by people who do not perceive themselves as taking risks. Wading through shallow water, anchoring a boat, cleaning nets, or sorting a catch are not considered dangerous acts, yet in stonefish territory, they carry a hidden cost. The venom's severity ensures that even a single spine puncture can incapacitate a healthy adult within minutes, leaving victims unable to walk, stand, or even maintain balance as pain overwhelms motor control. Biologically, the stonefish's venom delivery system is optimized for reliability rather than finesse. Each dorsal spine is connected to venom glands that rupture under pressure, ensuring that venom is released whenever the spine penetrates tissue. This means that even partial contact or glancing pressure can result in envenomation. And because multiple spines are arranged along the back, a single incident often involves several puncture wounds, compounding the dose delivered. The venom does not need to travel far to cause damage because its effects are both local and systemic, disrupting muscle contraction, blood flow, and nerve transmission at the site of injury, while also triggering broader physiological responses. One of the reasons stonefish injuries are so medically significant is that pain management becomes a primary challenge rather than an afterthought. The pain induced by stonefish venom is so intense that it can lead to secondary injuries as victims thrash, fall, or lose coordination, increasing the risk of drowning in shallow water or injury on boats. Standard analgesics are often insufficient, requiring strong pain relief and supportive care, while swelling and tissue damage can persist long after the initial encounter. In severe cases, venom-induced cardiovascular effects can lead to hypotension, arrhythmias, and respiratory distress, particularly in individuals with underlying health conditions or delayed treatment. Despite this, stonefish are not malicious animals seeking conflict, but highly specialized products of environments where remaining unseen is the most effective form of survival. Their camouflage is so precise that even predators adapted to detect subtle movements struggle to identify them, which means that humans, relying heavily on visual cues and pattern recognition, are at a distinct disadvantage. The fish's skin texture, coloration, and body shape vary among individuals and regions, allowing them to blend seamlessly into local substrates, whether sandy flats, coral rubble, or muddy estuaries. This variability further complicates avoidance, because learning to recognize one stonefish does not guarantee recognition of another. From an evolutionary standpoint, the stonefish demonstrates how extreme defenses evolve in response to consistent threats over long timescales, favoring adaptations that do not rely on learning or behavior, but on inevitability. Predators that survive an encounter with a stonefish quickly learn avoidance, while those that do not are removed from the gene pool, reinforcing the effectiveness of the venom. Humans, however, operate on cultural timescales rather than evolutionary ones, relying on education, signage, and protective gear to mitigate risks that biology has already optimized. This mismatch explains why stonefish injuries persist despite awareness campaigns, because awareness does not eliminate the need to place hands and feet into environments where the fish remains perfectly concealed. In many coastal communities, stonefish are known less as animals and more as events, remembered through stories of sudden pain, emergency evacuations, and long recoveries, reinforcing their reputation as punishers rather than predators. Fishermen often recount encounters where a routine haul turned catastrophic in seconds, not because of recklessness, but because the stonefish occupied the same physical space as their livelihood. This relationship highlights a broader truth about human interaction with marine ecosystems, where danger often arises not from deliberate confrontation, but from overlapping uses of shared environments, each shaped by different evolutionary pressures. The stonefish does not chase fishermen, swimmers, or tourists, yet it remains one of the most medically significant fish on Earth because it punishes contact without discrimination. Its venom exists to enforce distance in a world where remaining still is safer than fleeing, and its success as a species reflects how well that strategy works. For humans, the lesson is not fear, but respect for the hidden mechanics of ecosystems, where the most dangerous animals are not always those that move fast or look threatening, but those that remain unnoticed until the moment pressure turns illusion into injury. In this way, the stonefish stands as a reminder that in shallow waters, danger does not always announce itself, and that the most severe consequences often arise from actions so ordinary that no one expects punishment at all. The lionfish enters the reef like a living contradiction, drifting slowly through clear tropical water, with fins spread wide in elegant arcs, its striped body moving with the unhurried confidence of an animal that has mastered both beauty and threat. Sunlight filters down through the surface, catching the translucent membranes of its fins and igniting them in soft reds, browns, and whites, turning the fish into a floating display that looks more ornamental than dangerous. It does not dart, hide, or rush, but instead glides above coral heads and rocky ledges, hovering with precise control, its large eyes tracking movement while its body remains almost motionless. In ecosystems crowded with predators that rely on speed, stealth, or brute force, the lionfish stands apart as a slow-moving warning sign, advertising its presence rather than concealing it, because its survival does not depend on escape, but on deterrence delivered through venom. Those fins, so visually striking, are not decorative structures, but a ring of rigid spines connected to venom glands, each one capable of delivering a painful injection if pressed into flesh. The dorsal, anal, and pelvic spines form a defensive perimeter around the fish, creating a three-dimensional barrier that predators learn to avoid through experience or instinct. Unlike animals that must strike to inject venom, the lionfish relies on contact alone, meaning that any attempt to grab, bite, or mishandle it results in envenomation. This design allows the fish to move openly across the reef without constant vigilance, conserving energy while maintaining control over its immediate surroundings, and shaping predator behavior through negative reinforcement rather than physical dominance. Ecologically, the lionfish occupies a unique position as both predator and hazard, particularly in regions where it has become invasive. Its feeding strategy relies on stealth rather than speed, using its large pectoral fins to herd small fish and crustaceans into confined spaces before striking with a rapid suction-based bite. This method allows it to consume prey efficiently while remaining relatively stationary, reducing exposure to its own predators and minimizing energy expenditure. In native habitats, this strategy fits into a balanced system where prey species have evolved alongside lionfish and recognize the threat signals encoded in its posture and movement. In invaded ecosystems, however, prey species often fail to recognize lionfish as predators, leading to unchecked feeding that disrupts reef communities and alters population dynamics. Ironically, it is this ecological disruption that has turned lionfish into a target for human consumption, reframing the animal from ornamental hazard into desirable food source. Lionfish flesh is white, mild and firm, comparable to popular reef fish, and free of venom when prepared correctly. This has led to organized culling efforts where divers spear lionfish to reduce their numbers and repurpose them as food, transforming a conservation problem into a culinary opportunity. On paper, this seems straightforward because the venom is confined to the spines and not present in the muscle tissue, meaning that once the spines are removed, the remaining fillet is safe to eat. In practice, however, this process introduces a new layer of risk, because removing the venomous structures requires precise handling of an animal whose defensive system is designed to punish exactly that kind of contact. Underwater, divers approach lionfish with spears or pole weapons, aiming to immobilize the fish quickly to avoid prolonged struggle. The act of spearing itself is relatively low risk when executed correctly, because it keeps hands at a distance and neutralizes the fish's ability to maneuver. The danger escalates the moment the fish is brought close to the body, transferred to a container, or handled during ascent, because even a dead or dying lionfish retains fully functional venom spines. The venom apparatus does not require active muscle control, meaning that pressure applied to a spine will release venom regardless of the fish's condition, catching many first-time handlers off guard when they assume the threat has passed. On boats and shorelines, where lionfish are cleaned and prepared for cooking, injuries often occur during moments of distraction or overconfidence. A spine brushed accidentally against a finger, pressed into a palm while steadying the fish, or driven into skin while attempting to cut too close to the fins can result in immediate envenomation. The pain is sudden and intense, often described as burning, stabbing, or electric, radiating outward from the puncture site and escalating rapidly as venom spreads through surrounding tissues. Swelling follows quickly, sometimes accompanied by redness, numbness, and reduced mobility, making fine motor control difficult at the exact moment when careful handling is most needed. Physiologically, lionfish venom is a complex mixture of proteins that affect nerve transmission, blood vessels, and inflammatory pathways, producing a cascade of effects that extend beyond localized pain. The venom causes vasodilation, increasing blood flow to the affected area, which accelerates toxin spread while amplifying swelling and pressure within tissues. Nerve endings become hypersensitive, sending continuous pain signals that can overwhelm the body's normal coping mechanisms, while muscle fibers near the injection site may weaken or spasm, reducing grip strength and coordination. Although lionfish venom is rarely fatal in healthy adults, the intensity of the pain often leads to panic, which can exacerbate the situation by triggering physiological stress responses that increase heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen demand. This panic is a critical factor in many lionfish injuries because it turns a manageable medical situation into a cascading problem. Victims may drop knives, fall on boats, or lose balance in shallow water as pain distracts and disorients them, increasing the risk of secondary injuries. Inexperienced handlers sometimes attempt to squeeze, cut, or massage the wound aggressively, inadvertently spreading venom further into tissues rather than containing it. Others may delay proper treatment while assuming the pain will subside quickly, only to find that symptoms intensify over time, prolonging recovery and increasing the likelihood of complications such as infection or tissue damage. From an evolutionary perspective, this pain response is not incidental but central to the lionfish's defensive strategy, because it conditions predators to avoid future contact after a single encounter. Pain that is immediate, memorable, and disruptive creates a strong behavioral deterrent, reinforcing avoidance without requiring lethal outcomes. In natural ecosystems, this means that predators capable of surviving an initial sting learn quickly to recognize and avoid lionfish, preserving both species within the system. Humans, however, often override avoidance instincts through deliberate interaction, driven by economic incentive, culinary interest, or conservation goals, placing themselves in direct conflict with an adaptation that evolved to punish exactly that behavior. The irony is that lionfish are not aggressive animals, nor do they seek to sting humans, yet their design ensures that mistakes carry consequences. Unlike animals that deliver venom through bites or strikes, the lionfish relies on passive defense, meaning that any lapse in awareness or technique results in injury without warning. This makes handling protocols critical, requiring tools, containers, and procedures that minimize direct contact and account for the persistence of venom after death. Even experienced divers and fishers are occasionally injured, not through ignorance but through momentary lapses that highlight how unforgiving the system is. Ecologically, the push to consume lionfish represents an unusual case where humans attempt to integrate a venomous species into food culture as a form of ecosystem management. This effort requires not just culinary skill but biological understanding, because success depends on respecting the boundary between edible tissue and defensive anatomy. In regions where lionfish consumption is promoted, education emphasizes proper spine removal, safe handling techniques, and awareness of venom effects. Yet injuries still occur because the animal's defenses are optimized to exploit exactly the kind of tactile interaction that preparation requires. Pain management following a lionfish sting often involves immersion of the affected area in hot water, which can denature some of the heat labile components of the venom and provide relief. But this treatment is only effective when applied promptly and correctly. Delayed or improper treatment can result in prolonged pain, swelling, and impaired function, sometimes lasting days or weeks. In rare cases, individuals with allergies or underlying health conditions may experience more severe reactions, underscoring that even non-lethal venom can have serious consequences when combined with human variability. The broader lesson embedded in lionfish interactions is that beauty and danger are not opposing forces in nature, but often coexist as part of the same adaptive package. The lionfish's striking appearance is not an accident, but a signal, advertising its defenses to those capable of recognizing them, while simultaneously misleading those who associate beauty with safety. Humans, drawn to visual appeal and confident in their ability to manage risk, frequently misinterpret this signal, assuming that knowledge or intention can override biology. In the end, the lionfish is neither villain nor prize, but a living system refined by evolution to occupy its niche with efficiency and resilience. Its venomous spines are not obstacles to be conquered, but boundaries to be respected, gatekeepers that determine whether interaction remains controlled or becomes painful. When divers spear lionfish for food, they are not defeating the animal's defenses, but navigating around them, acknowledging that edibility does not negate danger. The pain, swelling, and panic that follow careless handling are reminders that in the natural world, consumption often comes with costs that cannot be ignored, and that even the most beautiful fillet demands respect long before it ever reaches the plate. The sea urchin appears at first glance as a static element of the sea floor, a dark, motionless shape wedged between rocks or clustered across reef flats like scattered caltrops, giving the impression of something inert rather than alive. In shallow coastal waters, where light penetrates easily and visibility creates a false sense of safety, urchins sit exposed, their spherical bodies armored with dense forests of spines that sway slightly with the movement of water but otherwise remain fixed in place. They do not chase, stalk, or ambush, and they make no effort to flee approaching hands or feet, because their survival strategy does not require movement. Instead, they rely on a design perfected by evolutionary patience, one that turns physical contact into a prolonged lesson rather than an immediate punishment, embedding consequences that linger long after the initial encounter. Biologically, sea urchins are echinoderms, relatives of starfish and sea cucumbers, built around a radial body plan that emphasizes structural resilience over speed or intelligence. Their spines are not simple spikes, but complex, brittle calcium carbonate structures connected to ball and socket joints that allow limited movement and precise angling. This articulation lets urchins orient their spines toward threats, creating a dynamic defensive surface that responds to pressure rather than intent. When something brushes against an urchin, the spines do not merely prick the skin, but often snap, because they are designed to break rather than bend, leaving fragments embedded in tissue where removal becomes difficult, painful, and medically complicated. This snapping mechanism is central to why sea urchin injuries are so persistent and underestimated, because unlike venomous animals that deliver a clear sting followed by immediate symptoms, urchins impose a slow-burning consequence that unfolds over days or weeks. When a spine penetrates the skin, it frequently fractures below the surface, leaving calcium fragments lodged in muscle, joints, or connective tissue. These fragments are porous and fragile, making them resistant to extraction with tweezers or needles, and attempts to pull them out often cause further breakage, driving pieces deeper rather than removing them. The result is a foreign body reaction, where the immune system treats the fragments as intruders, surrounding them with inflammation that leads to swelling, redness, and persistent pain. Infection compounds this problem because the spines themselves are not sterile, carrying bacteria and organic material from the seafloor into the wound. Even without venom, this combination of embedded fragments and microbial contamination creates an environment where healing is slow and unpredictable. In some cases, the body eventually dissolves or encapsulates the calcium fragments over time, but this process can take months, during which movement remains painful and function is impaired. Joints are particularly vulnerable because spines lodged near tendons or cartilage can interfere with motion, leading to stiffness and chronic discomfort that persists long after the initial injury seems trivial. The phrase, "just pull it out," persists largely because sea urchin injuries do not look dramatic, lacking the immediate swelling or systemic symptoms associated with venomous stings. This visual understatement leads people to underestimate the complexity of the injury, treating it as a minor inconvenience rather than a structural problem. In reality, forceful removal often worsens outcomes because the spines are designed to shear under stress, breaking into multiple fragments that scatter through tissue. Once this happens, complete removal becomes nearly impossible without medical intervention, and even surgical extraction may fail to locate every fragment, leaving behind pieces that continue to irritate nerves and muscles. From an ecological standpoint, the sea urchin's defense is elegantly suited to its lifestyle, because it discourages repeated contact without requiring energy-intensive behaviors. Predators that attempt to bite or crush urchins often suffer injuries to mouths or digestive tracts, learning avoidance through experience rather than death. This allows urchins to graze openly on algae, scraping surfaces with their specialized mouthparts known as Aristotle's lantern, a complex jaw apparatus capable of grinding down tough plant material and even limestone. This grazing behavior plays a critical role in shaping reef ecosystems, influencing which organisms dominate available space and how energy flows through the system. In balanced ecosystems, sea urchins act as regulators, preventing algae from overgrowing corals and maintaining open surfaces where new life can settle. Predators such as sea otters, certain fish, and large invertebrates keep urchin populations in check, creating a dynamic equilibrium where grazing pressure remains moderate. When these predators are removed, however, urchin populations can explode, leading to what are known as urchin barrens, vast stretches of seafloor stripped of kelp and algae, reduced to rocky deserts dominated by spines and shadows. In these barrens, biodiversity collapses because the structural complexity provided by kelp forests disappears, along with the shelter and food sources they support. This ecological collapse highlights the paradox of the sea urchin, because the same animal that becomes a delicacy on human plates can simultaneously act as an ecosystem engineer capable of reshaping entire coastal landscapes. Uni, the edible gonads of certain urchin species, is prized for its rich, buttery flavor and delicate texture, making it a luxury item in global cuisine. Harvesting urchins for food, however, brings humans into direct contact with their defenses, particularly when collection occurs by hand in shallow waters where spines are easily overlooked. Many injuries occur not during consumption, but during gathering, as collectors reach into crevices, overturn rocks, or step on hidden urchins while focused on their catch. In these moments, the environment itself conspires against caution because shallow reefs often appear benign, with clear water, gentle currents, and familiar terrain. Feet sink slightly into sand, hands search through algae, and balance shifts unpredictably as waves pass overhead, increasing the likelihood of accidental contact. When a foot or hand presses down on an urchin, dozens of spines can penetrate simultaneously, snapping off beneath the skin and embedding fragments across a wide area. The pain may be immediate but tolerable, leading some to dismiss the injury, only to discover later that swelling and stiffness intensify as inflammation sets in. From a physiological perspective, the long-term pain associated with sea urchin injuries is not merely psychological, but rooted in ongoing tissue irritation and immune response. Embedded spine fragments can press against nerves, causing sharp, localized pain during movement, while surrounding inflammation restricts blood flow and slows healing. In some cases, granulomas form around retained fragments, creating hard nodules that persist indefinitely and require surgical removal. This is why delayed treatment often leads to worse outcomes, because the longer fragments remain embedded, the more the body adapts around them, making extraction increasingly difficult. The sea urchin's lack of venom does not make it harmless, but instead shifts the timeline of consequence, replacing immediate danger with prolonged discomfort and ecological impact. Its defenses are subtle, cumulative, and indifferent to intent, punishing carelessness rather than aggression. This design aligns perfectly with an animal that cannot flee and does not need to, because its environment rewards patience and persistence over speed. By remaining in place and letting the world come to it, the urchin transforms contact into consequence, ensuring survival through endurance rather than intimidation. In the broader context of human interaction with marine ecosystems, sea urchins exemplify how danger often emerges from misunderstanding rather than malice. People step on urchins, collect them, or handle them not because they seek risk, but because the environment feels familiar and manageable. The resulting injuries serve as reminders that even non-venomous animals can impose significant costs when their biology intersects with human behavior. Unlike dramatic predators that inspire fear, sea urchins quietly enforce boundaries through design, embedding lessons beneath the skin that cannot be ignored or rushed. Seen through an ecological lens, the sea urchin is neither villain nor victim, but a keystone participant in coastal systems, capable of shaping landscapes and human experiences alike. Its spines defend not just its body, but its role within the ecosystem, preserving a grazing strategy that influences everything from coral recruitment to kelp forest stability. When humans harvest urchins for uni, they are engaging with an organism whose defenses have already accounted for contact, ensuring that the exchange carries weight beyond the meal itself. In the end, the hidden consequence of the sea urchin is not merely pain or infection, but a deeper reminder that marine ecosystems operate on rules written long before. Human hands entered the water. The spines that snap off inside skin are not flaws or accidents, but features honed by evolution, designed to linger, irritate, and instruct. In this way, the sea urchin teaches its lesson slowly, embedding it beneath the surface where it cannot be pulled out easily, ensuring that those who underestimate it remember the encounter long after the reef has faded from view. Night fishing transforms shallow tropical waters into a different world, one where visibility collapses into narrow cones of artificial light, and the surface becomes a mirror that hides what moves beneath it. Nets are hauled slowly from dark water, heavy with catch, vegetation, and whatever else the tide has gathered. And hands work by muscle memory rather than sight, sorting shapes that resist, twist, or slide unexpectedly through the mesh. In these moments, sea snakes become a danger, not because they seek conflict, but because their ecology places them exactly where human routines intersect with stress, confusion, and low visibility. They are drawn to the same shallow reefs, estuaries, and sandy flats that support fishing grounds. And when nets sweep these environments indiscriminately, snakes are lifted from water into air, from freedom into confinement, triggering defensive responses shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Sea snakes are not anomalies, but highly specialized reptiles that have fully committed to life in the ocean, evolving flattened tails for propulsion, valves that seal their nostrils underwater, and lungs that extend nearly the length of their bodies to aid buoyancy and gas exchange. Some species can absorb oxygen directly through their skin, supplementing lung breathing and allowing extended dives, while others regulate salt balance through specialized glands beneath their tongues, excreting excess salt gathered from seawater. These adaptations allow sea snakes to inhabit environments where terrestrial snakes would fail, but they also bind them to shallow coastal zones where prey is abundant and water temperatures support reptilian metabolism. This ecological overlap with fishing activity is not accidental, but inevitable, because both humans and snakes are targeting the same productive margins between land and sea. When a sea snake becomes entangled in a net, its world shifts instantly from controlled buoyancy to crushing pressure and restraint. Stress hormones flood its system, muscles contract against resistance, and defensive instincts activate in a context where escape routes no longer exist. Unlike fish, which may thrash briefly and then weaken, sea snakes retain strength and coordination even under extreme stress because their physiology evolved to handle prolonged exertion and oxygen deprivation. Their response to entanglement is not passive, but exploratory and reactive, testing pressure points with coiling movements and, when restrained, biting at whatever presses against their bodies. This is where many fishermen make fatal mistakes, not because they are careless, but because they misjudge the animal they are dealing with. Sea snakes are often described as docile, slow, or reluctant to bite, and under normal circumstances, this is largely true because they conserve venom for prey and avoid unnecessary confrontation. In the water, with room to maneuver, most sea snakes will retreat rather than attack, using their agility to slip away. In a net, however, restraint overrides temperament, turning an otherwise non-aggressive animal into a defensive weapon acting on reflex rather than intention. The venom delivered by sea snakes is among the most potent of any snake group, evolved for rapid immobilization of fish prey in open water, where escape must be prevented immediately. It is predominantly neurotoxic and myotoxic, targeting both nerve transmission and muscle tissue, causing paralysis and muscle breakdown that begins at the cellular level. A single bite can deliver enough venom to kill a human many times over, yet paradoxically, sea snake bites are often painless or only mildly uncomfortable at first, creating a dangerous delay between exposure and response. This delayed onset is one of the most lethal aspects of sea snake envenomation because it encourages victims to underestimate the severity of the situation and continue working, resting, or delaying medical attention until irreversible damage has begun. After a bite, symptoms may not appear for hours, during which venom circulates quietly through the bloodstream, disrupting muscle fibers and interfering with neuromuscular junctions. As muscle tissue breaks down, myoglobin is released into the blood, placing extreme stress on the kidneys, while respiratory muscles begin to weaken without dramatic warning signs. Victims may notice generalized muscle soreness, stiffness, or darkening urine long after the bite itself has faded from memory, mistaking these symptoms for fatigue or dehydration rather than systemic poisoning. By the time breathing becomes labored or paralysis advances, antivenom may no longer be effective, and supportive care becomes a race against cascading organ failure. Panic plays a critical role in turning survivable encounters into fatal ones, both before and after a bite occurs. When fishermen recognize a snake in a net, instinct often drives them to grab, throw, or strike the animal in an attempt to remove it quickly, increasing handling time and physical contact. Sea snakes, unlike many terrestrial snakes, have short fangs and small mouths relative to their body size, which means that bites often occur when hands are placed close to the head during attempts to untangle or restrain. Jerky movements, shouting, and crowding around the animal amplify stress, making defensive strikes more likely and less controlled. Even after a bite, panic leads to poor decisions, such as cutting off circulation improperly, applying ineffective folk remedies, or continuing physical exertion that accelerates venom spread. Because pain is minimal, victims may dismiss the incident entirely, returning to work and unknowingly increasing heart rate and blood flow, which distributes venom more rapidly through the body. This combination of delayed symptoms and continued activity explains why sea snake bites are disproportionately dangerous compared to their frequency, earning them a reputation as silent killers rather than dramatic threats. Safe release behavior exists precisely because sea snake danger is situational rather than inherent, and when followed correctly, it dramatically reduces risk. Experienced fishers learn to keep distance between hands and the snake's head, using tools rather than bare hands to cut netting or lower sections back into the water. Allowing the snake to remain submerged during release reduces stress and defensive behavior, because water restores its primary mode of control and orientation. Calm, deliberate movements prevent escalation, while awareness that the snake's priority is escape rather than attack reframes the interaction as a controlled disengagement rather than a confrontation. Education about sea snakes emphasizes restraint over speed, because rushing to remove an entangled snake often increases exposure time and bite risk. Paradoxically, slowing down and creating space reduces danger, allowing the animal to reorient and move away once freed. These principles mirror broader patterns in human-wildlife interactions, where fear-driven reactions provoke the very outcomes they seek to avoid, turning manageable situations into emergencies through escalation rather than resolution. Ecologically, sea snakes play an important role in regulating fish populations, particularly small reef and benthic species that thrive in shallow waters. By targeting specific prey types, they influence community composition and energy flow within coastal ecosystems, acting as both predators and indicators of environmental health. Declines in sea snake populations often signal broader ecological disruption, such as pollution, habitat loss, or overfishing, highlighting their sensitivity to changes in water quality and prey availability. Ironically, bycatch incidents that injure or kill sea snakes contribute to these declines, creating feedback loops that destabilize ecosystems and increase the frequency of stressed encounters as remaining snakes concentrate in shrinking habitats. From an evolutionary standpoint, the potency of sea snake venom reflects the demands of hunting in an environment without barriers, where prey escape routes are unlimited and failure to immobilize quickly means starvation. This evolutionary pressure produced venom that is fast, efficient, and unforgiving, optimized for fish physiology rather than mammalian resilience. Humans, when bitten, experience the collateral effects of a system never designed with them in mind, a reminder that danger does not require intent, only overlap. The tragedy of sea snake bycatch lies in how preventable many incidents are, given proper knowledge and behavior. The snakes do not seek nets, boats, or hands, yet they are pulled into human activity by currents, prey movements, and fishing practices that ignore non-target species. When bites occur, they are rarely acts of aggression, but reflexive defenses triggered by confinement, mishandling, or panic. Understanding this reframes sea snakes not as villains lurking in the dark, but as participants in shared environments where stress transforms survival instincts into hazards. In the end, sea snakes embody the quiet risks of working at the boundary between land and ocean, where visibility is limited, routines dominate attention, and assumptions about danger fail. Their venom is not dramatic in onset, nor is their presence obvious, but their impact is decisive when mistakes compound. For fishermen pulling nets at night, the lesson is not fear, but discipline, recognizing that calm, distance, and patience are the most effective defenses against an animal whose greatest danger lies not in its behavior, but in the delayed consequences of misunderstanding it. Shallow coastal waters look harmless when the tide is low and the light is good, because sandflats stretch out in pale gradients, broken only by ripples, seagrass patches, and the occasional dark shape gliding just beneath the surface. This is where fishing feels routine rather than risky, where nets are pulled by hand, lines are checked barefoot, and movement becomes casual because the environment appears familiar. Stingrays belong to this exact zone, not as intruders but as long-term residents, adapted to life pressed flat against the bottom, reading vibrations through sand rather than sight, and trusting concealment over confrontation. They are not ambush predators in the dramatic sense, nor are they aggressive animals waiting to strike. But their anatomy ensures that when contact happens accidentally, the consequences escalate faster than anyone expects. A stingray resting on the seafloor is almost invisible. because its body is designed to erase edges. The broad, flattened disc settles into sand with slow pulses of water pushed through spiracles on the top of the head, while fine grains drift over the back, softening outlines and breaking up contrast. Only the eyes and breathing openings remain exposed, and even these sight flush with the body, scanning upward for silhouettes rather than nearby movement. This posture allows stingrays to conserve energy, regulate body temperature against the cooler substrate, and remain hidden from predators above, while waiting for prey such as crustaceans and small fish that move along the bottom. For humans wading or working nearby, this invisibility creates the illusion of empty space, a dangerous assumption in environments where touch replaces sight as the primary mode of interaction. The stingray's tail looks unremarkable at a glance, a thin extension trailing behind the disc, often partially buried or drifting loosely in the current. Embedded along this tail, however, is the animal's defining feature, a rigid spine commonly referred to as a barb, though its structure is far more complex than the name suggests. This spine is not smooth or needle-like, but flattened and serrated, with backward-facing edges that function like barbs on a fishhook, designed to resist withdrawal once embedded. The spine is composed of modified dermal tissue hardened with mineral deposits, making it strong enough to penetrate skin, muscle, and even thin bone under pressure. Covering this spine is a thin sheath of tissue that contains venom-producing cells, which rupture when the spine enters flesh. The venom itself is not primarily neurotoxic like that of sea snakes, but a mixture of proteins that cause intense pain, tissue inflammation, and localized necrosis. Once the sheath tears, venom spreads directly into the wound, contaminating tissue as the serrated edges tear through it. This combination of mechanical damage and chemical insult is what turns stingray injuries into medical emergencies, even when the initial contact seems minor. Most stingray injuries do not occur during dramatic encounters, but during ordinary moments of handling and cleanup. Fishermen hauling nets may find a ray tangled in mesh, its disc folded awkwardly, tail still free and reactive. In shallow waters, people step around rays unknowingly, startling them from rest and triggering a reflexive tail flick as the animal attempts to escape. Unlike predatory strikes, this movement is defensive and uncontrolled, driven by the need to create distance rather than to target a specific threat. Unfortunately, the range of motion places the spine exactly where legs, ankles, hands, and forearms tend to be during fishing and wading activities. When a stingray barb enters flesh, the immediate pain is severe, but it is rarely the most dangerous aspect of the injury. The serrated edges prevent clean withdrawal, meaning that as the spine penetrates and then retracts, it tears tissue rather than slipping out smoothly. In some cases, the spine breaks off inside the wound, leaving fragments embedded deep within muscle, which complicates treatment and increases the risk of infection. The venom amplifies inflammation, causing rapid swelling that compresses surrounding tissue and blood vessels, intensifying pain and slowing healing. One of the reasons stingray wounds become disasters rather than straightforward injuries is the environment in which they occur. Seawater is rich in bacteria, including species that thrive in warm, shallow conditions, and the stingray's spine is not sterile. When the barb punctures skin, it introduces not only venom, but also microorganisms directly into deep tissue, bypassing surface defenses. This creates ideal conditions for infection, particularly when wounds are not cleaned promptly or thoroughly due to pain, panic, or lack of immediate medical resources. Panic is a recurring factor in stingray injuries because the shock of sudden pain often triggers instinctive reactions that worsen outcomes. Victims may yank limbs away forcefully, increasing tearing and embedding fragments more deeply. Others may attempt to walk it off, continuing to bear weight on an injured foot, driving venom and bacteria further into tissue through muscle contraction and blood flow. In fishing scenarios, attention often shifts to saving equipment or catch rather than managing the wound, delaying proper care at a critical moment. From a biological standpoint, the stingray's defensive system is designed to discourage repeat contact rather than to kill, but its effectiveness lies in how thoroughly it punishes mistakes. Predators that survive an initial encounter learn to avoid rays entirely, recognizing the shape and posture that signal danger. This avoidance allows stingrays to maintain their bottom-dwelling lifestyle without constant movement, conserving energy and reducing exposure. Humans, lacking evolutionary familiarity with these signals, often fail to recognize the warning signs, interpreting stillness as safety and concealment as absence. Ecologically, stingrays play a significant role in shaping benthic environments because their feeding behavior disturbs sediment as they excavate prey, aerating the substrate and redistributing nutrients. This bioturbation influences the composition of invertebrate communities and affects how energy flows through shallow ecosystems. In moderation, this activity enhances habitat complexity, but in areas where ray populations increase due to predator loss or environmental change, their impact can become disruptive, altering seagrass beds and benthic assemblages. This dynamic underscores how stingrays are not passive residents of shallow waters, but active participants in ecosystem engineering. The barb itself is not a weapon wielded with precision, but a last resort defense evolved to function under stress. Stingrays do not chase or attack, and many encounters end without injury when rays detect vibrations early and swim away. Problems arise when escape routes are blocked by nets, shallow depth, or human proximity, forcing the animal into close quarters where reflex replaces strategy. In these moments, the tail whips upward with surprising speed, driven by powerful muscles designed for propulsion rather than combat, turning the barb into an unpredictable hazard. Medical treatment of stingray injuries focuses not only on pain management, but on preventing long-term complications, because untreated wounds can lead to chronic infection, tissue death, or impaired mobility. Hot water immersion is commonly used to alleviate pain, as heat can denature some venom components, but this does nothing to address mechanical damage or embedded fragments. Thorough wound cleaning, imaging to locate retained spines, and antibiotics are often required, particularly when injuries occur in tropical waters where bacterial loads are high. What makes stingray encounters particularly deceptive is how familiar the animals feel within coastal landscapes. They are often seen gliding peacefully near shorelines, appearing graceful and non-threatening, which encourages complacency rather than caution. Unlike sharks or venomous snakes, stingrays rarely inspire fear, and their injuries are often dismissed as freak accidents rather than predictable outcomes of ecological overlap. This perception gap contributes to repeated incidents as people continue to wade, handle, and untangle rays without adjusting behavior. Simple changes in awareness dramatically reduce risk, because stingrays respond predictably to vibration and movement. Shuffling feet through sand rather than stepping lifts rays gently, giving them time to move away before contact occurs. Maintaining distance from the tail during handling, using tools instead of hands to free nets, and prioritizing calm movements reduce the likelihood of triggering defensive strikes. These practices align with the stingray's own priorities, allowing escape rather than confrontation. Seen through a broader lens, stingrays represent a class of marine animals whose danger emerges not from aggression, but from anatomy intersecting with human routine. Their barb is not an invitation to conflict, but a boundary marker, enforcing space in environments where visibility and communication are limited. When that boundary is crossed inadvertently, the consequences reflect both biological design and human error, compounded by panic and misunderstanding. In the end, the stingray is not a menace lurking beneath the sand, but a reminder that shallow waters are not empty, and that stillness often conceals complexity rather than safety. The barb that ruins a catch does so not out of malice, but because evolution favored a defense that works instantly under pressure, indifferent to intent. For those who work and walk these waters, respect does not mean fear, but awareness. An understanding that in the quiet margins between land and sea, the most disruptive dangers are often the ones that never move until it is too late. Barracuda patrol the edges of reefs with a confidence that feels earned, cruising through clear tropical water in long, deliberate lines. Their bodies rigid and streamlined, their jaws slightly open, as if relaxed rather than threatening. They are not chaotic hunters, nor do they thrash through coral in bursts of panic like many reef predators, because their strategy relies on patience, vision, and explosive precision rather than endurance. Sunlight flashes across their silver flanks as they turn, reflecting the environment back at itself, making them appear almost neutral, like a moving mirror rather than an animal. In this visual ambiguity lies the first layer of danger, because barracuda look clean, healthy, and ordinary, indistinguishable from countless edible reef fish that end up on plates every day. Nothing about their appearance warns that eating one can quietly dismantle a human nervous system from the inside. Ciguatera poisoning does not announce itself with rot, decay, or bitterness, and this is what makes it uniquely terrifying as a foodborne threat. The fish looks fresh, smells normal, cooks beautifully, and tastes exactly as expected, often described as mild, firm, and pleasant, the kind of meat associated with safe, traditional meals rather than danger. The betrayal happens after the meal is finished, when the body begins responding to a toxin that never altered the fish's appearance or flavor. This is not contamination introduced during handling or storage, but a biological accumulation that began years earlier, deep within the reef ecosystem, long before the fish ever encountered a hook or net. Ciguatera originates at the very base of the reef food web, produced by microscopic dinoflagellates that live attached to algae on coral surfaces. These organisms thrive in warm, stable waters, particularly in reef systems that have been disturbed by storms, bleaching events, or physical damage, because broken coral provides more surface area for algal growth. Herbivorous fish graze on this algae and ingest the toxin without immediate harm, because their physiology can tolerate low levels. Small predators then eat many of these herbivores, accumulating higher concentrations, and larger predators consume them in turn, amplifying the toxin through a process known as biomagnification. By the time a top predator like a barracuda has lived long enough to reach impressive size, it may carry toxin levels capable of severely poisoning a human, despite showing no outward signs of illness. This is why Ciguatera is most often associated with large reef predators, particularly barracuda, grouper, and snapper, species that occupy high positions in the food chain and feed opportunistically across multiple trophic levels. The toxin binds to sodium channels in nerve cells, altering how they open and close, which disrupts normal electrical signaling throughout the nervous system. Unlike many poisons that are rapidly metabolized or neutralized by heat, ciguatoxin is remarkably stable, surviving cooking, freezing, drying, and digestion without degradation. No culinary technique can make contaminated fish safe, because the toxin is already integrated into the flesh itself. The onset of symptoms is often delayed, which deepens the sense of betrayal because the meal feels complete and harmless until the body begins to unravel hours later. Early signs may include nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, which are unpleasant but familiar enough that they may be dismissed as food intolerance or minor illness. As the toxin continues to interfere with nerve signaling, neurological symptoms emerge that are so strange they feel unreal, creating confusion and fear that compounds physical distress. One of the most distinctive features of Ciguatera poisoning is temperature reversal, where hot objects feel cold and cold objects feel burning hot, a sensory inversion that disorients victims and makes everyday interactions painful and alarming. This temperature reversal occurs because ciguatoxin alters how sensory neurons transmit signals related to temperature and touch, scrambling the brain's interpretation rather than damaging the receptors themselves. The skin is intact, the nerves are present, but the electrical code has been corrupted, turning neutral information into distress signals. Victims may describe icy water as scalding or a warm shower as piercing cold, experiences that can persist for weeks, months, or even years after the initial exposure. Alongside this, numbness, tingling, muscle weakness, and joint pain may develop, making movement uncomfortable and coordination unreliable. What makes Ciguatera particularly insidious is that symptoms can fluctuate and reappear long after the initial poisoning seems to have resolved. Physical exertion, alcohol consumption, or eating certain foods can trigger relapses because these factors influence nerve excitability and toxin redistribution within the body. This unpredictability traps victims in a cycle of recovery and setback, where normal life becomes difficult to resume without fear of symptom recurrence. Unlike acute poisoning events that end decisively, Ciguatera lingers, reshaping how the nervous system responds to the world. From an ecological perspective, the existence of Ciguatera is not an accident, but an emergent property of reef ecosystems under stress. Healthy reefs with balanced predator populations and intact coral structures tend to regulate dinoflagellate growth naturally, limiting toxin production. When reefs are damaged by storms, warming events, or human activity, algal overgrowth creates favorable conditions for toxin-producing organisms to expand. In this sense, Ciguatera acts as a biological warning signal, indicating that the reef system itself is out of balance, even when fish populations appear abundant and healthy. Barracuda, as apex or near-apex predators, become unwilling messengers of this imbalance, concentrating the toxin and delivering it to humans who harvest them without visible warning signs. Their role as fast, opportunistic hunters means they sample broadly across the reef community, feeding on whatever fish are available rather than specializing narrowly. This dietary flexibility increases their likelihood of accumulating ciguatoxin over time, especially in regions where reef disturbance is common. Larger, older individuals are at the greatest risk, not because they are inherently more dangerous, but because they represent longer exposure histories within the food web. The fear surrounding barracuda consumption has deep roots in fishing cultures, where knowledge of which fish to avoid is often passed down through experience rather than scientific explanation. In many regions, large barracuda are avoided entirely, while smaller individuals may still be eaten cautiously, reflecting an intuitive understanding of biomagnification long before the term existed. Despite this, tourism and changing food markets sometimes override local caution, introducing barracuda into meals for people unfamiliar with the risks. This is where Ciguatera becomes viral, not through contagion, but through narrative, because the idea that a normal-looking fish can quietly dismantle your senses taps into a primal fear of food betrayal. Unlike venomous animals that signal danger through appearance or behavior, Ciguatera-laden fish offer no such cues. There is no discoloration, no smell, no taste that hints at what is coming, which undermines trust in one of the most fundamental human survival behaviors: eating. This violation of expectation is psychologically powerful because it challenges the assumption that danger is visible and avoidable, replacing it with uncertainty that lingers long after the meal. Once someone experiences Ciguatera, food itself can become suspect, altering relationships with seafood, culture, and place. Medical treatment for Ciguatera is limited because there is no antidote that neutralizes the toxin once it has bound to nerve channels. Care focuses on managing symptoms, supporting hydration, and monitoring neurological function. But recovery depends largely on the body's ability to gradually adapt or clear the toxin over time. This lack of a clear cure reinforces the sense of helplessness that accompanies the illness, as victims realize that prevention is the only reliable defense. From a broader perspective, Ciguatera illustrates how human health is inseparable from ecosystem health, linking microscopic algae to apex predators, and finally to the dinner table. It reveals how disturbances ripple upward through food webs, turning abundance into risk without altering outward appearances. Barracuda are not poisonous by nature, nor are they hostile to humans, but they become dangerous through participation in systems that humans have altered and misunderstood. The barracuda itself remains unchanged by this narrative, continuing its patrols along reef edges, accelerating in sudden bursts to capture prey, regulating fish populations through predation. Its body is a product of evolutionary efficiency, built for speed and precision rather than deception, yet it becomes an unwitting symbol of betrayal because its flesh carries a hidden history written in toxins rather than scars. In this way, the fish becomes less important than the process it represents, a reminder that danger does not always come from sharp teeth or aggressive behavior, but from invisible chemistry shaped by ecological imbalance. In the end, the fear associated with barracuda consumption is not irrational, but grounded in a complex chain of cause and effect that connects reef health, food webs, and human vulnerability. The fish looks normal because it is normal, healthy within its own ecosystem. Yet that same normalcy conceals a toxin that turns nourishment into harm. This is the true power of Ciguatera as a story, not just of poisoning, but of trust broken by nature's indifference to human expectation. The reef does not care who eats whom, and when that indifference reaches the plate, the lesson is delivered quietly, long after the meal is finished, in sensations that refuse to behave the way they should. Groupers dominate reef landscapes with a kind of quiet authority that feels earned rather than advertised, hovering near ledges, caves, and coral overhangs where shadows collect and currents slow. Their bodies are massive and solid, built more like armored vaults than streamlined missiles, and they move with deliberate economy, rarely wasting energy on unnecessary motion. Large eyes track the reef calmly, mouths open just enough to ventilate gills, while thick lips and cavernous jaws hint at power without spectacle. In underwater markets and fishing lore alike, this appearance translates into value, because size suggests success, age suggests quality, and bulk suggests abundance. The grouper looks like the ultimate dinner fish, the kind that feeds families, fills restaurants, and justifies high prices without needing explanation. What it does not reveal, even to trained eyes, is the invisible chemistry that can turn that expensive meal into a prolonged neurological disaster. Ciguatera poisoning hides inside groupers for the same reason it hides inside barracuda. But the risk profile is amplified by the grouper's biology, behavior, and role within reef ecosystems. Groupers are apex or near apex predators that sit high in the food web, feeding on a wide variety of reef fish, crustaceans, and cephalopods over long lifespans that can span decades. Unlike fast-moving pelagic predators that migrate constantly, many groupers are site-attached, spending years or even their entire lives within relatively small reef territories. This means they accumulate whatever toxins exist in that local system slowly and steadily, integrating chemical history into their flesh over time, without any outward sign of harm. Ciguatera begins far below the grouper's awareness, at the microscopic level, where toxin-producing dinoflagellates grow on algae coating coral rubble and reef surfaces. These microorganisms flourish especially well in disturbed reef environments, where storms, warming events, or physical damage create space for algae to spread. Herbivorous fish graze on this algae and ingest small amounts of toxin, which does not kill them outright, but becomes stored within their tissues. Smaller predators consume many of these herbivores, accumulating higher concentrations, and when groupers feed on those predators, the toxin climbs another step up the ladder. This process of biomagnification means that the largest, oldest groupers carry the highest risk, not because they are diseased, but because they represent the longest chemical memory of the reef. From an ecological perspective, groupers are essential regulators of reef communities, controlling populations of mid-sized fish and maintaining balance among competing species. Their hunting strategy relies on ambush rather than pursuit, using sudden suction feeding to pull prey into their mouths in fractions of a second. This allows them to capture fast, agile fish without expending much energy, reinforcing their role as efficient, dominant predators. That same efficiency, however, ensures they consume a broad cross-section of the reef community, increasing exposure to any toxins circulating within the system. The grouper's success as a predator becomes the mechanism by which it becomes dangerous as food. The danger is particularly pronounced in large specimens, those prized by markets and restaurants for their visual impact and perceived prestige. In many cultures, a massive grouper displayed on ice or swimming in a restaurant tank is a symbol of quality and prosperity, something ordered for celebrations, business deals, or tourists seeking an authentic luxury experience. This cultural valuation runs directly counter to biological reality because size and age correlate strongly with toxin accumulation. Locals in many reef regions understand this intuitively, avoiding monster groupers while still consuming smaller individuals that carry lower risk. This knowledge is often passed through generations, shaped by experience rather than formal science, and reinforced by stories of meals that went wrong long after the plates were cleared. Tourism markets, however, frequently disrupt this balance because visitors equate size with value and assume that expensive means safe. Restaurants respond to demand, sourcing the largest fish to justify higher prices and spectacle, while customers chase the novelty of eating something rare and impressive. In these scenarios, Ciguatera becomes a silent passenger, moving from reef to kitchen without detection. Cooking does nothing to neutralize the toxin. Freezing preserves it, and taste offers no warning because ciguatoxin does not alter flavor or texture. The fish is fresh, clean and perfectly prepared, which makes the eventual symptoms feel unreal, disconnected from the meal that caused them. When ciguatera poisoning follows a grouper meal, it often begins subtly, with gastrointestinal discomfort that feels familiar enough to dismiss. As hours pass, neurological symptoms emerge that defy common illness patterns, including tingling in the extremities, muscle weakness, and the now infamous temperature reversal, where cold feels painfully hot and warmth feels unnaturally cold. These sensations arise because ciguatoxin binds to sodium channels in nerve cells, forcing them to remain open longer than they should, amplifying and distorting electrical signals. The nervous system remains structurally intact, but its communication becomes unreliable, turning normal sensory input into persistent distress. The psychological impact of these symptoms is profound because they erode trust in the body's interpretation of reality. Simple actions like drinking water, touching metal, or stepping into a shower become confusing and uncomfortable, and because symptoms can persist for months or longer, recovery feels incomplete even when acute illness fades. Physical exertion, alcohol, or certain foods can trigger relapses because they influence nerve excitability and toxin redistribution, trapping victims in cycles of improvement and setback. This long tail of effects is what transforms ciguatera from a bad meal into a life-altering experience. From a medical standpoint, treatment options are limited because there is no antidote that removes ciguatoxin once it has integrated into nerve tissue. Care focuses on managing symptoms, maintaining hydration, and monitoring neurological function, but time is the primary factor in recovery. This lack of definitive treatment reinforces the importance of prevention, which in turn depends on ecological awareness rather than culinary technique. No amount of skill in the kitchen can compensate for a toxin that entered the fish years earlier through normal feeding behavior. The relationship between groupers and ciguatera also highlights broader patterns of reef health and human impact. Regions with intact predator populations, stable coral cover, and balanced grazing pressure tend to experience fewer ciguatera outbreaks because toxin-producing dinoflagellates remain controlled. Where reefs are stressed by overfishing, warming waters, or physical damage, algal growth accelerates, providing habitat for toxin producers and increasing the likelihood that ciguatera will move up the food chain. In this sense, grouper toxicity is not random, but a signal of ecological imbalance, reflecting changes that may not be immediately visible above water. Groupers themselves show no signs of illness from ciguatera because their physiology tolerates the toxin without disruption. This asymmetry between human vulnerability and fish resilience underscores how toxins function differently across species, shaped by evolutionary pressures that have nothing to do with human consumption. What harms us is irrelevant to the fish, and what benefits the fish does not account for us, creating a mismatch that becomes apparent only when ecosystems and markets intersect. The fear associated with eating large groupers is therefore not superstition, but pattern recognition rooted in both biology and experience. Locals avoid giant specimens not because they look threatening, but because they understand that age and size carry hidden histories. This contrasts sharply with tourist-driven demand for spectacle, where the biggest fish becomes the centerpiece of a meal precisely because it looks impressive and rare. In these moments, cultural values override ecological wisdom, turning knowledge into commodity and risk into novelty. Groupers occupy a strange position in this story because they are neither villains nor victims, but conduits through which reef chemistry enters human lives. Their slow growth, long lifespans, and dominant feeding roles make them natural accumulators, not just of toxins, but of environmental information. Eating a large grouper is, in effect, consuming the history of a reef, including its disturbances, imbalances, and microbial dynamics. When that history includes ciguatera, the consequences unfold not on the reef, but in the nervous system of the person who ordered the fish. Seen through this lens, the big dinner fish trap is less about greed or ignorance and more about misunderstanding scale. Bigger feels safer, older feels better, and more expensive feels controlled. Yet biology operates on different rules, where accumulation favors risk rather than purity. The grouper does not betray the diner intentionally, but it also does not protect them. because it has no evolutionary reason to do so. Its flesh reflects the reef that sustained it, for better or worse. In the end, groupers remind us that luxury in nature is often an illusion created by human markets rather than ecological truth. The most expensive fish on the table may carry the heaviest invisible burden, not because it is flawed, but because it is successful within its ecosystem. Understanding this reframes caution not as fear, but as respect for systems that operate beyond taste, price, or appearance. When locals decline the largest grouper and choose a smaller one instead, they are not missing out, but reading the reef correctly, recognizing that sometimes the biggest prize is the one that stays in the water. Moray eels belong to the architecture of the reef rather than its open spaces, woven into cracks, holes, and collapsed coral structures where light fades quickly and movement is constrained by stone. Their bodies disappear into these narrow passages with uncanny precision, leaving only a head exposed, jaws parted in a way that many mistake for aggression when it is simply respiration. Water must be actively pumped over their gills, and in the still pockets of reef interiors, that pumping becomes visible, rhythmic, and unsettling to human observers. Teeth curve inward like hooks, eyes remain fixed and unblinking, and the illusion forms instantly that the animal is waiting to attack. In reality, the moray eel is waiting for nothing more dramatic than oxygen and opportunity, a patient ambush predator perfectly adapted to a world where space is tight, escape routes are limited, and contact often happens at arm's length. Morays are built for confinement, not pursuit, their elongated bodies lacking the speed and endurance of open water hunters, but compensating with flexibility, grip, and explosive bite force at close range. Their skin is thick, scaleless, and coated in a mucus layer that protects against abrasion and infection while allowing them to wedge deep into coral without injury. Powerful muscles run the length of the body, enabling sudden lunges that appear almost teleport-like when they strike from a crevice. This design makes morays exceptionally effective predators of reef fish, octopus, and crustaceans that seek refuge in the same holes and ledges, turning shelter into a liability for prey that misjudge what already occupies the space. This same design also creates one of the most dangerous interfaces between humans and reef predators, because morays live exactly where hands go when people fish, spear, free lines, or explore underwater cavities. Many injuries occur not during deliberate hunting, but during moments of assumption, when someone reaches into a hole believing it empty, or attempts to retrieve a trapped fish without seeing what else is inside. Morays do not recognize hands as hands, nor do they differentiate between prey and threat under stress. They respond to intrusion with a bite driven by reflex, not calculation, and that bite is engineered to hold, not release. Moray eel teeth are sharply recurved and designed to grip slippery prey, preventing escape once contact is made. The jaws close with considerable force, but what makes moray bites particularly dangerous is not just the mechanical damage, but the behavior that follows. Morays often latch on and twist, using the confined space of their lair to leverage their bodies, tearing tissue rather than puncturing cleanly. This results in irregular wounds that are difficult to clean and prone to infection, especially given the bacterial load present in reef environments and the eel's own oral microbiome. Compounding this danger is the moray's second set of jaws, the pharyngeal jaws, which extend from the throat to pull prey deeper once captured. While these jaws are not typically involved in defensive bites on humans, their existence underscores how evolution optimized morays for gripping and swallowing rather than quick release. When a moray bites, letting go is not part of the design, and human attempts to pull away often worsen injuries by increasing tearing and embedding teeth more deeply. This alone would make morays animals to avoid handling, but the danger does not end with the bite. Moray eels occupy high positions in reef food webs, feeding on a wide range of fish that themselves may carry accumulated toxins. Like barracuda and groupers, morays are susceptible to ciguatera poisoning because they consume prey that has already ingested toxin-producing dinoflagellates indirectly through algae-based food chains. Over time, These toxins biomagnify, concentrating in the tissues of long-lived predators that feed broadly across the reef community. Morays are particularly effective accumulators because of their longevity, site fidelity, and opportunistic diet. Many species remain within the same reef systems for years, repeatedly consuming prey drawn from the same toxin pool. Unlike fast-moving pelagic fish that dilute exposure through migration, morays integrate the chemical signature of their local reef directly into their bodies. Large individuals, especially those inhabiting disturbed or algae-rich reef systems, may carry toxin loads sufficient to cause severe ciguatera poisoning in humans. This creates a rare and powerful double danger scenario, where the act of catching the animal is hazardous, and the act of eating it can be even worse. In many reef regions, morays are avoided as food not because they are universally toxic, but because risk assessment is nearly impossible. A moray looks like a moray, regardless of toxin load, and no visual, olfactory, or culinary test can reveal whether its flesh contains ciguatoxin. Cooking does not neutralize the toxin, freezing preserves it, and taste offers no warning, making consumption a gamble with potentially long-lasting neurological consequences. Ciguatera poisoning from moray eel consumption follows the same cruel pattern seen with other reef predators, but with added irony given the difficulty of capturing the animal in the first place. Symptoms may begin hours after a meal, starting with gastrointestinal distress that feels unpleasant but manageable. As the toxin interferes with sodium channels in nerve cells, neurological effects emerge that feel surreal, including tingling, numbness, muscle weakness, and the characteristic temperature reversal, where cold sensations burn and warmth feels icy. These symptoms are not psychosomatic, but reflect real disruptions in nerve signaling, where electrical impulses fire incorrectly, amplifying and distorting sensory input. What makes ciguatera especially damaging is its persistence. Victims may recover partially, only to experience relapses triggered by exertion, alcohol, or certain foods that alter nerve excitability. Recovery can take months or longer, reshaping daily life in ways that are difficult to explain to others because the illness leaves no visible injury. For those who suffer it, the reef becomes associated not with nourishment or beauty, but with betrayal, where a meal drawn from pristine waters dismantles trust in the body's own perceptions. Ecologically, the presence of ciguatera in moray eels signals deeper imbalance within reef systems. Dinoflagellates that produce ciguatoxin thrive in disturbed environments, where coral damage, warming waters, or nutrient runoff encourage algal overgrowth. As these microorganisms spread, the toxin moves upward through the food web, accumulating in predators that humans traditionally value as food. Morays, with their sedentary habits and broad diets, become repositories of this invisible chemistry, carrying the consequences of reef degradation within their flesh without suffering themselves. Morays show no signs of illness from ciguatera because their physiology tolerates the toxin without disrupting nerve function in the same way it does in humans. This asymmetry highlights a recurring theme in marine ecology, where toxins evolve to shape interactions between species, not to accommodate human consumption. What harms us is incidental, collateral damage from systems optimized for entirely different purposes. The moray's resilience to toxin reflects evolutionary pressures that rewarded survival within chemically complex environments, where dietary flexibility offered advantages despite the presence of bioactive compounds. The danger of morays is therefore not rooted in malice or aggression, but in proximity and misunderstanding. Divers and fishers often encounter morays at close range, mistaking stillness for safety or assuming that familiarity reduces risk. Feeding morays, a practice sometimes encouraged in tourism, further erodes natural caution, conditioning animals to associate human presence with food and increasing the likelihood of accidental bites. This artificial familiarity benefits neither party because it places humans within striking range and disrupts the moray's natural hunting behavior. From a behavioral standpoint, morays are not unpredictable, but their predictability operates on rules unfamiliar to humans. They defend space rather than territory, reacting strongly to intrusion within reach while ignoring distant movement. They rely on chemical cues as much as vision, using scent to locate prey hidden within crevices, which means that a hand smelling of fish becomes indistinguishable from food in low-light conditions. These sensory priorities explain why bites often occur during fishing or handling, when human behavior inadvertently mimics prey signals. Medical treatment of moray bites focuses on thorough wound cleaning, infection prevention, and careful monitoring, because the combination of deep tearing and bacterial contamination creates high risk for complications. Even minor-looking wounds can become serious if not managed properly, and attempts to self-treat often underestimate the complexity of the injury. When combined with the potential for ciguatera exposure through consumption, morays emerge as one of the most multifaceted hazards of reef interaction, dangerous not through speed or venom, but through layered risks that unfold across time. The "do not eat that" reputation of moray eels did not emerge from superstition, but from accumulated experience passed down through fishing communities that learned to respect patterns long before understanding mechanisms. Avoidance was not moral judgment but survival strategy, shaped by stories of bites that refused to heal and meals that destroyed health long after they were finished. In regions where food scarcity forced consumption despite the risks, those lessons were often learned the hard way, reinforcing caution through consequence rather than instruction. Seen in the broader context of reef ecology, the moray eel is not an anomaly, but a symbol of how danger concentrates where systems overlap. It lives where shelter is scarce, food is contested, and chemistry matters as much as teeth. Its body reflects adaptation to confinement and ambush, while its diet integrates the reef's chemical history into muscle and bone. Humans encounter it at the worst possible angles, reaching into darkness, driven by curiosity, hunger, or routine, and suffer when assumptions collide with reality. In the end, the moray eel represents a rare kind of double danger, where interaction carries immediate physical risk and delayed toxic consequence. Catching it can maim, and eating it can unravel the nervous system, not because the animal is cursed or hostile, but because it embodies the reef's complexity without compromise. Respecting morays does not mean fearing them, but recognizing that some animals are not meant to be handled or eaten, no matter how familiar they seem. The reef offers abundance, but it also enforces boundaries, and few creatures enforce them as thoroughly and as quietly as the moray eel waiting just inside the rock. The Napoleon fish moves through coral reefs like a living monument, its immense body gliding with slow authority through channels carved by centuries of water and growth, its thick lips and sloping forehead instantly recognizable even to those who know little about reef life. Also known as the humphead wrasse, it is one of the largest reef fish on Earth, a presence so commanding that smaller fish part instinctively as it passes, retreating into crevices and branching coral as though a piece of the reef itself has decided to drift. Its coloration shifts subtly with age and mood, from muted blues and greens to deeper turquoise and jade, catching sunlight in a way that makes it look ancient, deliberate, and almost ceremonial. To see one alive on a reef is to witness stability made flesh, an animal shaped by long lifespans, slow growth, and ecological dominance rather than speed or aggression. This sense of permanence is precisely what makes the Napoleon fish such a prized target in luxury seafood markets, where rarity, size, and visual drama translate directly into price. In parts of Asia, particularly within high-end restaurant culture, the Napoleon fish has become a status symbol, displayed alive in tanks before being selected for consumption as proof of wealth, influence, or celebration. Its sheer mass promises abundance, its reputation promises exclusivity, and its cost signals power. The act of eating it is not just about nourishment, but about signaling access to something few can afford, turning a keystone reef species into a living trophy whose value increases as its numbers decline. Ecologically, the Napoleon fish occupies a critical role within coral reef systems, feeding on a wide range of prey, including crustaceans, mollusks, sea urchins, and even toxic animals such as crown-of-thorns starfish. This diet makes it a regulator of reef health, indirectly protecting corals by controlling species that can otherwise devastate reef structure. Its powerful jaws and thick pharyngeal teeth allow it to crush hard-shelled prey that few other fish can handle, opening feeding niches unavailable to smaller predators. By consuming organisms that damage coral or compete aggressively for space, the Napoleon fish helps maintain balance in reef communities, acting as a slow-moving but decisive stabilizer in an ecosystem where unchecked growth can quickly become destructive. This ecological importance stands in sharp contrast to its fate in seafood markets, where demand has driven intense overfishing across much of its range. Napoleon fish grow slowly, mature late, and form predictable spawning aggregations, traits that make them exceptionally vulnerable to exploitation. Removing large adults does not simply reduce population size, but destabilizes reproduction itself, because younger fish cannot replace the ecological function or breeding output of mature individuals for many years. In this sense, every trophy-sized Napoleon fish removed from a reef represents not just a meal, but a structural loss that reverberates through the ecosystem long after the plate is cleared. Overlaying this conservation crisis is a darker biological twist that complicates the luxury narrative even further, because like other large reef predators, Napoleon fish can accumulate ciguatera toxins in their flesh. Their position high in the food web, combined with long lifespans and broad diets, makes them susceptible to biomagnification of ciguatoxin, particularly in reefs affected by environmental stress. As coral systems degrade and algal growth increases, toxin-producing dinoflagellates expand, initiating a chain reaction that moves invisibly from algae to herbivores to predators. By the time a Napoleon fish reaches the size most prized by markets, it may carry a chemical history spanning decades of reef disturbance. Ciguatera poisoning does not respect price, prestige, or preparation. The fish may arrive alive, appear healthy, and be prepared by skilled chefs using flawless technique, yet none of this alters the toxin embedded within its muscle. Cooking does not neutralize it, freezing preserves it, and taste offers no warning. The flesh remains delicate, mild, and highly palatable, reinforcing the illusion of safety right up until the body begins to respond. This is where the luxury narrative collapses, because the very qualities that make the Napoleon fish valuable, size, age, and dominance, also increase the likelihood that it carries toxins capable of causing severe neurological illness. The symptoms of ciguatera poisoning following consumption of large reef fish are unsettling precisely because they violate expectation. What begins as gastrointestinal distress can evolve into neurological effects that feel alien and persistent, including numbness, tingling, muscle weakness, and disturbances in temperature perception, where cold sensations burn and warmth feels unnaturally sharp. These effects arise because ciguatoxin interferes with sodium channels in nerve cells, altering how electrical signals are transmitted without destroying the cells themselves. The nervous system remains intact but unreliable, sending distorted messages that turn ordinary sensations into sources of discomfort and confusion. For individuals accustomed to associating expensive food with safety and quality, this experience is deeply destabilizing. The meal that was meant to signify success instead becomes a reminder that biology does not negotiate with social status. Recovery can take weeks, months, or longer, and symptoms may recur unpredictably, triggered by physical exertion, alcohol, or certain foods that influence nerve excitability. There is no antidote that removes the toxin once it is bound to nerve tissue, leaving patients reliant on supportive care and time rather than decisive treatment. This phenomenon has been recognized by coastal communities for generations, long before scientific explanations existed. In many regions, local fishers avoid consuming very large reef fish, including Napoleon fish, not because they are ignorant of their value, but because experience has taught them that size correlates with risk. This knowledge is often dismissed or overridden by commercial demand, particularly in export-driven markets where fish are sold far from the reefs they came from, disconnecting consumers from ecological context. In this separation, the fish becomes a product rather than a participant in an ecosystem, and its hidden risks become someone else's problem. The rich people dinner that backfires narrative surrounding Napoleon fish is therefore not accidental, but rooted in a fundamental mismatch between market values and ecological realities. Luxury markets reward rarity, size, and spectacle, while biology rewards balance, moderation, and resilience. When these systems collide, the consequences are borne not just by consumers who fall ill, but by reefs stripped of one of their most important guardians. The irony is sharp, because the very act of consuming a Napoleon fish undermines the reef health that made the fish possible in the first place. Beyond ciguatera risk, the conservation status of the Napoleon fish adds another layer of complexity to its story. Classified as endangered in many regions, it is protected by international regulations that are unevenly enforced, creating black markets where illegal capture feeds luxury demand. Live fish trade routes move Napoleon fish across borders, often keeping them alive in poor conditions until sale, compounding stress and mortality while eroding already fragile populations. In this context, the fish's presence on a menu is not just a culinary choice, but a signal of systemic failure, where ecological warning signs are ignored in favor of short-term profit. From a biological perspective, the Napoleon fish's vulnerability is the direct result of evolutionary strategies that favored longevity and stability over rapid reproduction. Its slow growth allows it to integrate deeply into reef systems, shaping community dynamics over decades, but leaves it ill-equipped to rebound from intensive harvest. This is not a flaw, but a reflection of the environment it evolved in, one where predators were limited and ecological balance was maintained through feedback rather than exploitation. Humans, entering this system with industrial efficiency and global demand, disrupted that balance faster than the species could adapt. The risk of toxin accumulation in Napoleon fish further underscores how tightly human health is linked to ecosystem health. Ciguatera outbreaks are more common in reefs under stress, where algal growth favors toxin-producing microorganisms. In this sense, illness following consumption of large reef fish is not random, but symptomatic of broader environmental degradation. The fish becomes a messenger, carrying the chemical consequences of reef damage into human bodies, making the cost of ecological neglect tangible in deeply personal ways. Seen in this light, the Napoleon fish is not just a luxury item gone wrong, but a case study in how excess reverberates through natural systems. Its size and beauty inspire awe underwater, yet provoke greed above it. Its ecological role stabilizes reefs, yet its removal destabilizes both ecosystems and human expectations. Eating it promises prestige, yet risks neurological chaos, collapsing the illusion that wealth insulates against natural consequence. The tragedy is that none of this diminishes the fish itself, which continues to glide through remaining reefs with the same slow confidence, performing its role without regard for markets or menus. It crushes sea urchins, regulates invertebrate populations, and patrols coral structures with ancient efficiency, embodying a balance that humans have struggled to respect. The danger arises not from the fish's existence, but from the story humans have built around it, one where rarity invites consumption rather than protection. In the end, the Napoleon fish represents the ultimate contradiction of reef exploitation, a creature so valuable alive that it shapes ecosystems, yet so coveted dead that it is driven toward extinction and illness alike. The dark twist is not hidden venom or aggressive behavior, but the realization that luxury itself can be toxic when it ignores ecological truth. For those who chase the biggest, rarest, and most expensive meal, the Napoleon fish offers a sobering lesson, not delivered through sharp teeth or venomous spines, but through invisible chemistry and irreversible loss, reminding us that some trophies are better left swimming, where their value extends far beyond the plate. The octopus does not occupy the reef so much as infiltrate it, slipping through cracks no wider than a coin, flowing over rock like poured shadow, and vanishing into spaces that appear physically impossible for an animal of its size. In shallow coastal waters, where tide pools, reefs, and fishing grounds overlap, octopuses move through the same human-accessible spaces that invite hands, nets, traps, and curiosity. They are not apex predators in the conventional sense, nor are they passive prey, but highly adaptive generalists whose survival depends on intelligence, flexibility, and constant assessment of risk. To encounter an octopus alive is to meet an animal that is actively thinking about you, measuring distance, texture, pressure, and opportunity in real time. And that awareness changes everything when humans decide to turn it into food. An octopus resting on the seafloor is rarely still in the way other animals are still, because even when its body remains motionless, its skin is alive with information. Chromatophores expand and contract, subtly adjusting color and texture to match surrounding rock, sand, or coral, while deeper layers of iridophores and leucophores fine-tune reflectivity and brightness. This camouflage is not a blanket pattern, but a dynamic response driven by vision and neural processing, allowing the octopus to blend so effectively that it can disappear in plain sight. In this state, it is neither hiding nor relaxed, but poised, aware of vibrations through its arms, chemical cues in the water, and changes in light that signal movement nearby. Octopuses are built around a nervous system, unlike that of any vertebrate predator commonly harvested for food. More than half of their neurons reside in their arms, rather than in a centralized brain, allowing each limb to process information, explore independently, and react reflexively without waiting for instructions. This distributed intelligence gives octopuses extraordinary dexterity and problem-solving ability, but it also means that handling one is not a simple matter of controlling a single body. An octopus, being grabbed, netted, or lifted, experiences that contact as multiple simultaneous threats, triggering a cascade of local responses as arms attempt to grip, pull away, or anchor to surrounding surfaces. The beak, often overlooked by those unfamiliar with octopus anatomy, sits hidden at the center of the arms, a hard, sharp structure capable of piercing shells, crab carapaces, and fish skulls. This beak is used to deliver bites that inject saliva containing toxins designed to immobilize prey, making feeding efficient even on animals larger or better armored than the octopus itself. While these toxins are generally not life-threatening to humans, the bite can be painful, cause localized swelling, and become infected, particularly when it occurs during handling under stress. The danger lies not in venom alone, but in the combination of puncture wounds, bacterial exposure, and the surprise factor that causes people to react poorly in the moment. Most octopus bites on humans do not occur during deliberate hunting, but during capture, handling, or preparation, when assumptions about control replace respect for the animal's capabilities. Fishermen pulling traps may find an octopus clinging to mesh or bait, its arms wrapped tightly, suction cups creating seals strong enough to bruise skin or restrict blood flow. Attempting to pry those arms loose by force often backfires because the octopus responds by tightening its grip, bringing the beak closer to whatever it perceives as the source of pressure. In these moments, bites are defensive, reflexive, and close range, delivered not out of aggression, but out of survival logic, shaped by millions of years of predation. Suction itself is a hazard that many underestimate, because octopus suckers are not passive adhesive pads, but muscular structures capable of exerting significant force. Each sucker can independently create negative pressure, anchoring the arm to skin, rock, or equipment with surprising strength. When multiple suckers engage simultaneously, they can leave circular bruises, ruptured capillaries, and soreness that lasts days. In extreme cases, particularly when an octopus wraps around a limb underwater, suction can impede movement or balance, increasing the risk of falls, drowning, or secondary injury. This is not a deliberate attack, but a natural response of an animal attempting to stabilize itself or escape, using the tools evolution gave it. The intelligence that makes octopuses fascinating to observe becomes a liability during capture, because they do not freeze or submit like many fish. They test, probe, and adapt, learning quickly what works and what does not. An octopus that has been handled before may be more cautious, while one that has never encountered humans may react unpredictably, escalating defensive behaviors faster. Stress amplifies these responses, flooding the animal system with hormones that prioritize immediate survival over energy conservation. This is why handling live octopus without proper technique often leads to accidents, as human reflexes collide with cephalopod adaptability. Beyond the immediate physical risks, the cultural fascination with eating octopus introduces another layer of danger when preparation is rushed, improper, or driven by novelty rather than knowledge. In some contexts, octopus is consumed while still alive or minimally processed, a practice that carries significant risk even when performed by experienced professionals. Live octopus retains full muscular control, including the ability of arms and suckers to react independently after separation from the body. Improper handling can result in suction attaching to the mouth or throat, creating choking hazards, while stressed animals may bite reflexively even during preparation. These risks are not myths or exaggerations, but predictable outcomes of interacting with an animal whose nervous system does not shut down neatly when injured or restrained. Octopus arms can continue to respond to stimuli for extended periods, a phenomenon rooted in their decentralized neural architecture. This means that even after an octopus appears subdued, its arms may still grip, twist, or apply suction unpredictably, catching handlers off guard. When people underestimate this persistence, assuming that reduced movement equals reduced danger, injuries follow. Ecologically, octopuses occupy a unique niche as intelligent, short-lived predators that exert significant pressure on local prey populations while remaining vulnerable to predation themselves. Their rapid growth, high metabolic demands, and brief lifespans create a constant urgency in their behavior, driving them to explore, exploit, and adapt at a pace uncommon among marine invertebrates. This urgency translates into boldness during feeding and defense, particularly when resources are scarce or competition is high. For humans, this means that octopus behavior can vary widely depending on environmental conditions, making standardized handling assumptions unreliable. Thermoregulation plays a subtle role in octopus behavior that affects human interaction as well. As ectothermic animals, octopuses rely on ambient water temperature to regulate metabolic rate and activity levels. Warmer waters increase metabolism, responsiveness, and aggression, while cooler conditions slow movement and reaction time. In shallow fishing areas where water temperature fluctuates rapidly with tide and sunlight, octopus behavior can shift within hours, altering risk profiles without obvious warning. A calm animal encountered in the morning may behave very differently by afternoon, when heat has increased metabolic intensity. The practical danger of octopus handling is compounded by human psychology, particularly the tendency to anthropomorphize intelligent animals. Because octopuses display curiosity, problem-solving, and apparent awareness, people often project friendliness or cooperation onto them, assuming that intelligence equates to predictability. In reality, intelligence increases behavioral options, not compliance. An octopus assessing a human hand does not see a partner, but a variable object that may represent food, threat, or escape route, and its response reflects that calculation rather than emotional intent. Infections following octopus bites or suction injuries are an underappreciated risk, because marine environments host bacteria that thrive in saltwater and enter wounds easily. Puncture wounds from beaks are particularly prone to trapping bacteria deep in tissue, where oxygen levels are low and immune response is limited. Without prompt cleaning and monitoring, these wounds can worsen over time, leading to swelling, pain, and delayed healing that far outlasts the initial encounter. This is especially true in warm waters, where bacterial growth accelerates and small injuries can escalate quickly. From a conservation perspective, increased demand for octopus as food has placed pressure on populations already vulnerable due to their short lifespans and sensitivity to environmental change. While octopuses reproduce prolifically, their populations fluctuate dramatically in response to temperature, habitat availability, and fishing pressure. Overharvesting can lead to sudden collapses followed by unpredictable rebounds, destabilizing local ecosystems and increasing competition among remaining individuals. This instability can alter behavior, making octopuses more aggressive or bold in their search for food, further increasing the likelihood of human encounters. The phrase, "smart food that fights back," captures a reality that is often ignored in culinary narratives, because intelligence does not disappear at the moment of capture. The octopus continues to assess, react, and defend until its nervous system can no longer function. And even then, its decentralized design ensures that responses persist longer than expected. Treating such an animal as inert matter, rather than an active organism, invites mistakes, particularly when preparation is rushed or performed without full understanding of cephalopod biology. In many fishing communities, respect for octopus handling is learned through experience rather than instruction, shaped by stories of bites, bruises, and close calls that circulate quietly, rather than through formal warnings. This knowledge emphasizes patience, distance, and the use of tools rather than bare hands, acknowledging that control comes from reducing contact rather than overpowering the animal. Where this respect is lost, replaced by novelty-driven practices or shortcuts, injuries become more common, reinforcing lessons that biology has already written. The danger of octopus consumption is not rooted in malice or toxicity, but in mismatch between human expectations of control and an animal evolved to resist it through intelligence rather than force. The octopus does not rely on venomous spines or chemical deterrents to survive, but on adaptability, problem-solving, and a body plan that defies simple restraint. When humans ignore this, assuming that food is passive by definition, the result is surprise, pain, and occasionally serious harm. In the end, the octopus embodies a rare convergence of intelligence and vulnerability, an animal that can outthink many predators yet remains prey itself, navigating a narrow evolutionary path where flexibility determines survival. Eating it safely requires acknowledging that intelligence does not vanish at the moment of capture, and that respect is not sentimental, but practical. The reef does not distinguish between admiration and consumption, and neither does the octopus, which responds only to pressure, opportunity, and threat. For those who handle it, the lesson is clear and enduring, because smart food does not surrender easily, and when it fights back, it does so with tools designed not to impress, but to survive. Cuttlefish drift through coastal waters like living illusions, their bodies rippling with color and pattern in ways that seem almost unreal, as though the sea itself were testing new textures on a moving canvas. They hover just above sand flats, seagrass beds, and shallow reefs, neither fully benthic nor truly pelagic, occupying a liminal space where light is strong, predators are many, and escape depends on deception rather than speed alone. To fishermen and divers, cuttlefish often look harmless, even beautiful, their rounded bodies and gentle movements lacking the sharp edges or obvious weapons that trigger caution. This perception is exactly what makes them dangerous to handle, not because they are lethal, but because their survival strategies turn routine human actions into chaos when least expected. Cuttlefish belong to the same cephalopod lineage as octopuses and squid, but their approach to survival is distinct, built around control rather than raw power. Inside their bodies lies the cuttlebone, a porous internal shell that allows precise regulation of buoyancy by adjusting gas and liquid ratios. This structure lets cuttlefish hover effortlessly at specific depths, conserving energy while maintaining constant readiness. In shallow fishing areas, this means they can remain suspended just above nets, traps, or lines, often unnoticed until they are already tangled or scooped up with the catch. Their presence is quiet and unassuming, blending seamlessly into environments where humans assume control. The skin of a cuttlefish is one of the most advanced sensory and signaling surfaces in the animal kingdom, packed with chromatophores, iridophores, and leucophores that work together to change color, brightness, and pattern in milliseconds. Unlike passive camouflage, these changes are active responses to visual input, allowing cuttlefish to mimic sand ripples, seagrass shadows, or coral textures with uncanny accuracy. This ability makes them difficult to spot underwater, but it also means that when they are suddenly exposed on a boat deck or in a net, their appearance shifts dramatically in response to stress, flashing high-contrast patterns that signal alarm and confusion. These rapid visual changes often startle handlers, triggering reflexive reactions that escalate otherwise manageable situations. Handling a live cuttlefish is rarely straightforward because their bodies are soft, muscular, and extremely slippery, coated in a thin layer of mucus that reduces friction and protects against abrasion. This slipperiness is not incidental, but a functional adaptation that allows cuttlefish to slip free from grasping predators and tight spaces. When humans attempt to hold them with bare hands, especially on unstable boat decks, the animal's ability to twist and slide becomes immediately apparent. A cuttlefish can compress its body, rotate its fins, and use subtle jetting motions to squirt free, often at the exact moment when balance is compromised. This is where accidents begin, not from aggression, but from sudden loss of control. Jet propulsion is the cuttlefish's primary escape mechanism, powered by a muscular mantle that draws water in and expels it forcefully through a siphon. While cuttlefish are not built for sustained high-speed swimming like squid, their short bursts of acceleration are precise and surprising, capable of launching them out of hands, nets, or containers with little warning. On a boat, this sudden movement can cause a handler to stumble, drop equipment, or instinctively grab at the animal, increasing the risk of falls, cuts, or entanglement. The danger is indirect but real, because the cuttlefish's escape response exploits human reflexes rather than confronting them. Ink adds another layer to this chaos, transforming escape into confusion. When threatened, cuttlefish release clouds of ink that serve multiple functions, obscuring vision, creating decoy shapes, and disrupting sensory processing in predators. In water, this ink disperses quickly, but on a boat or dock, it coats surfaces in slick, dark fluid that reduces traction and visibility. A deck suddenly splattered with ink becomes hazardous, especially when combined with water, fish slime, and movement. Slips and falls following ink release are common among inexperienced handlers, not because the cuttlefish intends harm, but because its defense mechanisms are optimized for creating disorder. The ink itself is not venomous, but it is biologically active, containing compounds that interfere with sensory perception in predators and may irritate eyes or skin on contact. In confined spaces, such as small boats or buckets, ink can foul water quickly, stressing other live catch and complicating handling further. This cascading effect turns a single startled cuttlefish into a broader problem, affecting workflow, safety, and attention, increasing the likelihood of mistakes as people rush to restore order. From a behavioral standpoint, cuttlefish are highly responsive to environmental cues, adjusting their behavior based on light levels, temperature, and perceived threat. As ectothermic animals, their activity level increases in warmer water, making them more reactive and prone to sudden movement during handling in shallow, sunlit areas. In cooler conditions, they may appear lethargic, lulling handlers into a false sense of security before a sudden burst of motion proves otherwise. This variability makes standardized handling assumptions unreliable, because the same species can behave very differently depending on time of day and environmental context. Cuttlefish intelligence, while less celebrated than that of octopuses, plays a role in their unpredictability. They are capable of learning, memory, and problem-solving, adapting quickly to repeated stimuli. A cuttlefish that has escaped once may respond differently to subsequent capture attempts, altering timing, direction, or use of ink. This adaptability means that even experienced fishers can be caught off guard, because the animal's responses are not purely instinctual, but adjusted based on prior encounters. Ecologically, cuttlefish occupy an important position as mid-level predators, feeding on crustaceans, small fish, and other invertebrates, while serving as prey for larger fish, marine mammals, and humans. Their hunting strategy relies on stealth and precision, using rapid tentacle strikes to capture prey with minimal disturbance. This emphasis on control over brute force translates into defensive behavior that prioritizes escape and confusion rather than confrontation. When humans interfere, they encounter the downstream effects of these strategies in environments ill-suited to sudden motion and sensory disruption. Cuttlefish handling incidents often escalate because people underestimate the cumulative effect of small stressors. A slippery body, a sudden jet, a burst of ink, and a rocking boat combine into a situation where balance, grip, and attention are compromised simultaneously. Injuries that result are rarely dramatic, but they are frequent, including bruises from falls, cuts from dropped knives, entanglement in nets, and strained muscles from reflexive grabs. These are not injuries inflicted by the cuttlefish directly, but by the environment responding to the cuttlefish's attempt to escape. The risk extends into preparation as well, because cuttlefish retain muscular control and responsiveness until their nervous system is fully subdued. Improper handling during cleaning can result in sudden movements that knock tools aside or cause cuts, particularly when knives are involved. Ink sacs may rupture unexpectedly, splashing surfaces and reducing visibility at critical moments. Again, the danger lies not in toxicity or aggression, but in unpredictability combined with sharp tools and confined spaces. From a sensory perspective, cuttlefish experience the world differently than humans, relying heavily on vision and tactile feedback through their arms. Their eyes are among the most advanced in invertebrates, capable of detecting polarized light and subtle contrast changes. This sensitivity means that human movements, shadows, and reflections appear exaggerated to them, potentially triggering escape responses even when handlers believe they are moving slowly. Understanding this mismatch helps explain why cuttlefish often react out of nowhere, when in reality they are responding to stimuli invisible to us. The cultural framing of cuttlefish as a beautiful, relatively safe catch contributes to complacency, because they lack the overt danger signals of venomous or aggressive species. This framing overlooks the fact that danger in fishing environments is often situational rather than inherent, arising from the interaction between animal behavior and human context. Cuttlefish defenses are not designed to injure predators, but to destabilize them, creating moments of opportunity where escape becomes possible. On land or boats, this destabilization transfers risk onto humans instead. In many fishing communities, experience tempers enthusiasm, teaching that cuttlefish require calm, deliberate handling, secure footing, and appropriate tools. Respecting the animal's escape mechanisms reduces accidents, allowing it to be managed without triggering the full suite of defensive responses. Where this respect is absent, replaced by haste or curiosity, cuttlefish turn from aesthetic curiosities into catalysts for disorder. The dirty tricks of cuttlefish are not malicious, but elegant solutions to the problem of survival in exposed environments. Ink is not spite, but confusion. Jetting is not attack, but withdrawal. Slipperiness is not mockery, but protection. These traits evolved to defeat predators in water, but when transposed onto human settings, they produce consequences that feel disproportionate to the animal's apparent harmlessness. In the broader narrative of food-related marine danger, cuttlefish occupy an important niche, reminding us that risk does not always come from venom, toxins, or sharp teeth. Sometimes it emerges from complexity, from animals whose defenses operate by altering the environment rather than damaging the body directly. Handling cuttlefish safely requires acknowledging that beauty and intelligence often coexist with unpredictability, and that the absence of lethality does not equal the absence of danger. Ultimately, the cuttlefish teaches a subtler lesson than many of its more infamous reef counterparts. It shows that danger can be indirect, emerging from surprise, loss of control, and cascading effects rather than direct harm. In shallow waters and on working boats, where balance is fragile and attention divided, these indirect dangers matter. The cuttlefish does not need to be deadly to cause accidents, and it does not need to fight to win. It simply needs to do what it has always done, turn the environment itself into an ally, and slip away while everything else struggles to keep up. Crabs inhabit the margins of the sea where land and water negotiate ownership hour by hour, occupying tide pools, mangroves, rocky intertidal zones, and shallow flats that feel accessible, playful, and deceptively safe. These are the places where families wander barefoot, where children flip rocks in curiosity, where fishers reach instinctively into crevices, and where food seems close enough to grab rather than hunt. In this borderland between ocean and shore, crabs appear familiar and unintimidating, scuttling sideways with awkward speed, waving claws that look more theatrical than dangerous. That familiarity is precisely the problem, because crabs are not small, simple creatures operating on reflex alone, but heavily armored animals equipped with some of the most mechanically efficient crushing tools in the marine world, refined by evolution to break shells, dismember prey, and hold fast no matter how hard something pulls back. A crab's claw is not a hand, not a pincer, and certainly not a toy, but a biological press engineered to apply enormous force over a small surface area. Each claw is powered by thick bundles of muscle anchored inside a rigid exoskeleton, converting contraction into leverage through jointed segments that close with precision and speed. In many species, one claw is specialized for crushing, broad and heavy, with rounded teeth capable of breaking mollusk shells, while the other is sharper, designed for cutting, tearing, or manipulating food. This asymmetry allows crabs to handle prey efficiently, and it means that the danger they pose is not theoretical, but situational, depending on which claw closes and where. When a crab clamps onto a finger, the mechanics favor the crab completely. Human skin, nails, and tendons are soft relative to the calcified structures crabs evolved to destroy. Fingernails can crack or split under pressure, not because the crab is aggressive, but because the force applied exceeds what the nail can tolerate. Tendons running close to the surface of fingers and hands can be bruised or damaged, particularly when a claw locks and the person instinctively pulls away, turning a pinch into a tearing injury. The crab does not release because release is not part of its defensive strategy. Holding on is. This grip persistence is central to why crab injuries escalate so often. Crabs evolved in environments where predators try to pry, pull, or shake them loose, and their response to threat is to clamp down harder, not let go. When humans grab crabs for food or fun, the animal interprets that pressure as predation, triggering a defensive lock that becomes stronger as resistance increases. The more the person panics, shakes, or yanks their hand, the deeper the claw digs in, trapping fingers in a mechanical stalemate that the crab is structurally built to win. In tide pools, where water drains away and rocks bake in the sun, crabs are particularly vulnerable and therefore particularly defensive. These environments concentrate interactions, forcing animals into confined spaces where escape routes are limited. A crab wedged beneath a rock or tucked into a crevice cannot run, so it fights with the only tool it has, its claws. When someone reaches in without seeing what is inside, the encounter happens at close range, with no warning and no room to maneuver. The resulting injuries feel sudden and shocking, not because the crab moved fast, but because the person underestimated what was already there. The danger is compounded by the fact that crabs are not passive while being held. They twist their bodies, brace against surfaces, and reposition claws to improve leverage, using the environment to amplify force. A crab gripping a finger while braced against rock gains additional mechanical advantage, increasing pressure without increasing effort. This behavior is instinctive, honed by countless encounters with predators and rivals, and it means that even relatively small crabs can inflict disproportionate damage when conditions favor them. From an ecological perspective, these claws evolved to solve a problem humans rarely consider: how to access food encased in armor. Crabs feed on hard-shelled prey such as snails, clams, and other crustaceans, animals protected by structures far tougher than human tissue. Crushing those shells requires force, precision, and endurance, qualities that translate directly into injury potential when claws are misapplied to fingers. What feels like an attack is simply the crab doing what it does best, applying pressure until resistance gives way. Many injuries occur during crab harvesting, where speed and familiarity breed carelessness. People scoop crabs by hand, reach into traps, or grab from behind assuming control, only to discover that crabs can rotate their claws far enough to reach unexpected angles. Gloves provide limited protection against crushing force, especially if the claw closes over joints or fingernails rather than padding. In shallow water or on slippery rocks, balance issues exacerbate the problem, as a sudden pinch causes a reflexive jerk that leads to falls, dropped equipment, or secondary injuries. Children are particularly vulnerable in tide pool environments, where curiosity overrides caution and small hands fit easily into spaces crabs occupy. A child grabbing a crab for fun may not anticipate pain, and when it arrives suddenly and intensely, panic sets in. The instinctive response is to pull away, which increases injury and prolongs the encounter. Adults rushing to intervene may also get grabbed, turning a moment of exploration into a chain reaction of injuries rooted in misunderstanding rather than malice. The seriousness of crab injuries is often dismissed because they rarely look dramatic at first. There is no venom, no dramatic bleeding, no immediate collapse, just pain, pressure, and sometimes bruising or broken skin. Yet damage beneath the surface can be significant, particularly when tendons or joints are involved. Swelling can limit movement, and small cuts introduced by claw edges or broken skin can become infected. especially in warm marine environments rich in bacteria. What begins as a moment of surprise can turn into days or weeks of impaired hand function. Crabs also possess remarkable sensory awareness that influences how and when they strike. They detect vibrations through the substrate, sensing approaching footsteps, shifting rocks, or splashing water. In intertidal zones, this sensitivity helps them anticipate danger before visual contact occurs. A hand entering a tide pool sends pressure waves that alert crabs to intrusion, priming defensive responses before contact is made. By the time fingers touch shell, the crab is already prepared to clamp down. Temperature and tide cycles further influence crab behavior, altering activity levels and aggression. Warmer temperatures increase metabolic rate, making crabs faster and more reactive, while low tide concentrates stress, forcing animals to defend shrinking refuges. During these periods, crabs are less likely to flee and more likely to fight, increasing injury risk precisely when people are most likely to be exploring exposed tide pools. The social behavior of crabs adds another layer of complexity, because many species engage in territorial disputes and dominance displays that reinforce claw strength and reflexive use. Males often possess larger claws used in competition, and these claws are optimized for force rather than subtlety. Grabbing such a crab without understanding sex or species differences dramatically increases risk, as these individuals are both physically stronger and behaviorally primed to use their weapons. From a biological standpoint, the crab's success lies in its simplicity, armor, leverage, and persistence. It does not need speed, venom, or intelligence comparable to cephalopods to defend itself effectively. Its design assumes that anything grabbing it is either prey or predator, and in both cases, clamping down is the correct response. Humans, arriving with bare hands and curiosity, are treated no differently than anything else that intrudes into a crab's personal space. Culturally, crabs occupy a strange position as both food and playthings, creatures people feel entitled to handle because they are common and accessible. This perception masks the reality that crabs are wild animals with defenses tuned for survival, not entertainment. The practice of grabbing crabs for photos, races, or casual meals persists largely because injuries are sporadic rather than constant, creating the illusion that risk is low. When injuries do occur, they are often dismissed as clumsiness rather than predictable outcomes of interaction. The irony is that safe crab handling techniques are well known in fishing communities, emphasizing grip from behind the carapace, use of tools, and avoidance of claws entirely. Where this knowledge is respected, injuries decrease dramatically. Where it is ignored, particularly in recreational settings, the same mistakes repeat endlessly, passed down as anecdotes rather than lessons. Crabs are not villains, nor are they malicious, but they are uncompromising. Their claws exist to crush, cut, and hold, and they will do exactly that when given the opportunity. Underestimating them does not make them weaker. It simply places human fingers into the path of a system optimized for destruction. In the end, crabs teach one of the simplest and most overlooked lessons of coastal ecosystems, that danger does not scale with size or appearance, but with function. A small animal equipped with the right tools can inflict serious harm when those tools are ignored. Tide pools may look like playgrounds, but they are arenas shaped by survival pressures older than curiosity, and crabs enforce their boundaries without hesitation. For anyone reaching into shallow water with bare hands, the warning is not dramatic but practical, because claws do not bluff, and once they close, they rarely let go. Lobsters occupy a world built from pressure, darkness, and narrow margins, living among rocks, ledges, and sediment, where space is scarce and mistakes are costly. Along continental shelves and rugged coastal bottoms, they move deliberately through crevices and burrows, their armored bodies perfectly shaped for tight environments where retreat is often more important than speed. To the lobster, confinement is safety, and resistance is survival. To humans, however, that same environment becomes a workplace filled with hazards, where steel cages, heavy lines, cold water, and living animals collide. The danger surrounding lobsters does not come from malice or aggression, but from a mechanical ecosystem in which every component, including the animal itself, can turn a moment of carelessness into serious injury. Lobster pots, also known as traps, are designed to exploit lobster behavior rather than overpower it. They are baited cages with narrow entrances that funnel lobsters inward, using instinctive movement toward shelter and food. Once inside, the lobster finds itself in a confined chamber with sloping entry funnels that make exit difficult. These traps are effective precisely because they mimic the lobster's natural preference for tight, enclosed spaces, tricking the animal into treating the cage as refuge rather than threat. What works underwater, however, becomes dangerous above it, because the same tight geometry that holds lobsters also traps hands, lines, and attention when humans begin hauling gear back to the surface. A single lobster pot can weigh hundreds of pounds when saturated with water, encrusted with growth, and filled with catch. Lines attached to these pots stretch from seabed to surface, forming vertical hazards that can snag limbs, equipment, or divers with little warning. In rough seas or strong currents, these lines become unpredictable forces, tightening suddenly or shifting under tension. Divers working around pots risk entanglement, especially when visibility is low and orientation is compromised. Once caught in a line connected to a heavy pot, escape becomes a race against physics rather than strength, because the system is designed to resist movement, not allow it. On deck, the danger shifts, but does not diminish. Pots are hauled rapidly to maintain efficiency, swinging aboard vessels slick with water, algae, and bait residue. The momentum of a pot does not stop easily, and when it lands, it does so with force capable of crushing fingers, toes, or hands caught between metal bars and solid surfaces. Many injuries occur not because someone mishandled a lobster, but because they misjudged timing, assuming the pot had settled when it was still in motion. In these moments, gravity and mass replace claws as the primary source of harm. Lobsters themselves contribute to this danger through their anatomy and behavior, not by intent, but by design. Their claws are powerful tools evolved to crush shells, tear flesh, and defend territory. A lobster claw closes with speed and force that can break skin, crack nails, and in some cases damage small bones. Unlike crabs, lobsters often possess claws of unequal function. One crusher claw optimized for brute force, and one cutter claw designed for slicing. This division allows lobsters to apply damage in multiple ways, and when a claw closes on a finger, the injury reflects that specialization. Handling lobsters safely requires understanding how they perceive threat. Lobsters are not aggressive in the sense of seeking confrontation, but they are highly defensive, especially when removed from water. Stress triggers reflexive claw closure, and once a lobster grips something, it tends to hold rather than release. This behavior evolved to prevent predators from prying claws open, and it means that struggling against a lobster's grip often worsens injury. Fishermen who rush handling or skip securing claws expose themselves to bites that are entirely predictable outcomes of stress and proximity. The real danger emerges when claws, cages, and human hands intersect under pressure. A lobster caught in a pot may be tangled in mesh or wedged against bars, and freeing it requires placing fingers near claws while also applying force to remove the animal. In these tight spaces, lobsters brace against the trap, gaining leverage that increases the effectiveness of their grip. A sudden movement of the pot, whether from wave action or another crew member, can shift balance and bring claws into contact with unprotected skin. Injuries in these moments are rarely dramatic in appearance, but often severe in consequence, because they combine crushing force with tearing and contamination. Cold water adds another layer of complexity, dulling sensation and slowing reaction time. In many lobster fisheries, water temperatures are low enough to reduce dexterity, making fine motor control difficult. Fingers lose sensitivity, gloves become stiff, and feedback is delayed. A lobster claw closing on a numbed finger may not register immediately, causing delayed reactions that allow the grip to tighten fully before the person responds. This sensory lag increases injury severity and complicates release, particularly when heavy gear continues moving around the trapped hand. From an ecological standpoint, lobsters are built to survive precisely these kinds of mechanical stresses. Their exoskeletons protect against crushing pressure from rocks and predators, while their muscular claws allow them to defend limited territories fiercely. Lobsters spend much of their lives in confined spaces, competing with other lobsters for shelter and resources, which has shaped behavior that favors persistence over retreat. When placed in traps or handled by humans, these instincts do not switch off. The lobster responds to confinement and threat exactly as it would on the seafloor, by gripping, bracing, and resisting. Many injuries associated with lobsters are cumulative rather than instantaneous. Repeated minor pinches, cuts, and bruises can lead to chronic hand damage over time, especially in commercial fisheries where exposure is constant. Small wounds become infected in marine environments rich with bacteria, and repetitive strain from handling heavy pots contributes to long-term musculoskeletal issues. These injuries rarely make headlines, but they shape the lives of those who work around lobsters, turning routine labor into a slow negotiation with risk. Divers face a different but equally serious set of hazards. Retrieving lost pots or maintaining gear underwater requires maneuvering in close proximity to traps while managing buoyancy, equipment, and limited visibility. A diver who misjudges distance or orientation can become entangled in lines or wedged between pots and seabed. In such situations, lobsters inside traps may react defensively, snapping claws at movement or contact. While the lobster is not the primary threat, its presence adds complexity to an already dangerous environment, increasing stress and narrowing margins for error. The idea that lobsters are dangerous animals misses the point entirely. Lobsters do not hunt humans, inject venom, or attack out of curiosity. The danger arises from systems, heavy gear, confined spaces, repetitive motion, and complacency. Lobsters simply exist within those systems, responding to stress with the only tools they possess. When humans become sloppy, distracted, or rushed, those tools become part of a larger injury machine powered by gravity, momentum, and habit. Culturally, lobsters are often framed as luxury food, disconnected from the labor and risk involved in bringing them to market. This disconnect fosters underestimation of danger, particularly among recreational fishers or tourists who interact with lobsters without understanding the workflow of traps and handling. Grabbing a lobster for a photo, reaching into a pot out of curiosity, or lifting gear improperly may feel harmless in the moment. But these actions replicate the same risk factors commercial crews manage daily without the benefit of experience or caution. Experienced fishermen develop routines that minimize risk, securing claws quickly, maintaining spacing on deck, communicating movements, and respecting the momentum of gear. These practices are not signs of fear, but of familiarity earned through mistakes witnessed or survived. Where these routines break down, whether due to fatigue, weather, or inexperience, injuries spike. The lobster does nothing different, only human behavior changes. From a documentary perspective, lobsters reveal a truth about marine danger that often goes unnoticed, that the most serious risks come not from spectacular predators, but from ordinary work environments where living animals intersect with machinery. The lobster trap is not just a cage, but a moving structure that concentrates force and risk. The lobster is not a monster, but a stress-tested organism reacting predictably to confinement. Together, they form a system that punishes inattention and rewards respect. In the broader ecosystem, lobsters play vital roles as scavengers and predators, shaping benthic communities by controlling populations of mollusks and other invertebrates. Their removal at industrial scales alters seafloor dynamics, cascading through food webs in ways still being studied. Yet even as they are harvested intensively, lobsters remain indifferent to human intention, responding only to immediate stimuli and physical constraints. This indifference is what makes them dangerous in human contexts, because it eliminates negotiation or compromise. Ultimately, the story of lobsters as an injury machine is not a story about evil animals, but about physics and biology intersecting with human error. Heavy traps fall the same way every time, claws close the same way every time, lines tighten without concern for who is in the way. The lobster does not adapt to human workflows, and it does not need to. Humans must adapt to the lobster's world instead, or accept the consequences. In that sense, lobsters are honest. They do not hide their strength or disguise their defenses. The risks are visible, tangible, and repeatable. What makes them dangerous is not unpredictability, but the false sense of control that familiarity creates. When people forget that they are working inside a system designed for capture, not safety, the lobster trap reminds them, quietly and efficiently, that the ocean does not forgive sloppiness, and neither do the creatures built to survive within it. The monkfish lies where the seabed turns deceptive, where sand and silt soften outlines and movement slows into stillness that feels almost lifeless. On continental shelves and muddy slopes, this fish does not swim so much as wait, flattening its broad body against the bottom until it becomes indistinguishable from the ground itself. Its skin mimics sediment, its edges blur into debris, and its presence vanishes into the background noise of the ocean floor. To the untrained eye, it looks like discarded flesh, a rock, or something already dead. And that illusion is the foundation of both its hunting success and the danger it poses to humans who encounter it in nets and on decks. Monkfish are ambush predators, refined to extremes. Built not for pursuit but for explosive violence contained within fractions of a second. Their bodies are shaped like biological traps, with enormous heads that dominate their anatomy, mouths so wide they appear disproportionate to the rest of the fish. Inside those mouths are inward curving teeth, sharp, numerous, and angled to prevent escape once contact is made. These teeth are not decorative or incidental, but structural elements of a system designed to grab and hold prey that wanders too close. When a monkfish strikes, it does not chase or test, but opens and closes like a sprung mechanism, a trap door slamming shut with force that surprises even seasoned fishermen. This strike is powered by a sudden expansion of the mouth cavity, creating suction that pulls water and prey inward before the jaws close. The action is so fast that prey often disappears without visible movement, swallowed by a motion that looks more like collapse than attack. For fish, crustaceans, and cephalopods that stray within range, there is no warning and no escape. For humans handling nets, lines, or tangled catch, that same mechanism can activate unexpectedly, because the monkfish does not need to be swimming or alert in a way we recognize to be dangerous. The danger of monkfish lies in the assumption of death or incapacity. When hauled up in nets, monkfish often appear inert, their flattened bodies limp, their eyes dull, their movement minimal. They do not thrash like many fish, nor do they display obvious defensive behaviors. This stillness encourages complacency, leading fishermen to treat them as passive objects rather than live predators. Hands move closer, tools are repositioned, and attention shifts elsewhere, all while the monkfish remains capable of delivering a powerful bite with no visible warning. Monkfish bites occur most often during unhooking, untangling, or sorting, when hands enter the zone directly in front of the mouth. A monkfish caught in a net may be pinned awkwardly, its body compressed in a way that limits movement but does not disable jaw mechanics. In this position, it can still open its mouth forcefully, snapping shut on whatever enters reach. Fingers, gloves, and even tools can become trapped between rows of teeth that are designed to hold slippery prey, not release it. Once a monkfish bites, release is not immediate or guaranteed. The inward-facing teeth act like barbs, resisting backward movement, and the fish's powerful jaw muscles maintain pressure reflexively. Pulling away increases resistance, embedding teeth deeper and potentially tearing tissue. The bite itself may not always break skin dramatically, but the pressure can be intense enough to bruise, crush, or lacerate fingers, particularly when combined with the twisting motion of a struggling fish. These injuries are compounded by the context in which they occur. Fishing decks are unstable, wet, and crowded with equipment. A sudden bite can cause a reflexive jerk that throws off balance, leading to falls, collisions, or dropped tools. In cold conditions, numb fingers delay pain perception, allowing the bite to deepen before the person reacts fully. The combination of surprise, force, and environment transforms what might otherwise be a manageable injury into a cascade of risk. From an evolutionary standpoint, the monkfish's design makes perfect sense. It evolved to exploit environments where prey density is low and energy conservation is critical. By remaining motionless and striking only when success is nearly guaranteed, the monkfish minimizes wasted effort. Its wide mouth allows it to consume prey nearly its own size, while its teeth ensure that once prey enters, it does not leave. This strategy rewards patience and punishes proximity, traits that translate directly into danger for humans who misinterpret stillness as safety. Monkfish also possess a modified dorsal spine that functions as a lure, a small appendage that wiggles to attract curious prey. While this lure is more active during hunting on the seafloor than in nets, its presence underscores how deception is central to the monkfish's survival. Everything about the animal encourages approach, not avoidance, until it is too late. That same deceptive calm carries over onto fishing decks, where the fish's lack of obvious struggle reads as compliance rather than readiness. The phrase, "the monster you thought was dead," captures this dynamic precisely. Monkfish do not advertise danger through motion or sound. They do not flare fins, thrash violently, or attempt escape in ways that signal threat. Their danger is latent, stored, waiting for a moment of proximity. This makes them especially hazardous to inexperienced handlers, but it also catches seasoned fishermen off guard, because familiarity breeds assumptions that do not apply to this species. The teeth of a monkfish deserve particular attention, because they are optimized for gripping rather than cutting. They are sharp, but their true function is retention, angled backward to resist escape. When they close on flesh, they create a sensation of being held rather than sliced, which can delay recognition of injury severity. Skin may not bleed immediately, masking damage beneath the surface, while pressure bruises tissue and compromises circulation. In some cases, gloves reduce initial injury, but also prevent tactile feedback, allowing the bite to continue unnoticed for critical seconds. Infections are a secondary but serious concern. Monkfish, like many bottom-dwelling species, inhabit environments rich in bacteria and organic matter. Their mouths harbor microbial communities adapted to breaking down prey tissue, and bites introduce these organisms into wounds that may already be compromised by crushing and tearing. Without prompt cleaning and care, even small injuries can become infected, particularly in cold, damp conditions where healing is slower. Ecologically, monkfish play an important role in benthic food webs, regulating populations of fish and invertebrates that share the seafloor. Their predatory efficiency shapes community structure, influencing which species thrive and which avoid certain areas. This role depends on their ambush strategy remaining effective, which in turn depends on the element of surprise. Humans who encounter monkfish experience a fraction of this strategy firsthand, learning that danger does not always announce itself. Monkfish injuries are rarely the result of recklessness in the dramatic sense. They come from routine actions performed thousands of times, from habits formed through repetition, and from trust in visual cues that fail with this species. Sorting catch quickly, freeing tangled fish, and maintaining workflow are necessities in fishing operations, and monkfish exploit these necessities by remaining still until a hand enters range. The fish is not malicious, but it is perfectly adapted to capitalize on moments of inattention. The broader lesson embedded in monkfish encounters extends beyond this single species. It challenges the assumption that movement equals danger and stillness equals safety, an assumption deeply ingrained in human perception. In marine environments, especially those dominated by ambush predators, the opposite is often true. Stillness can signal readiness, and calm can conceal violence compressed into a moment too fast to avoid. From a documentary perspective, monkfish offer a powerful example of how evolutionary success can translate into occupational hazard when human activity intersects with natural systems. They illustrate how tools designed for survival become threats in artificial contexts, not because the animal changes, but because humans enter its operational range. The net becomes an extension of the seafloor, the deck a temporary staging ground, and the monkfish remains what it has always been, a predator waiting for proximity. Experienced crews mitigate this risk through procedure rather than force. They secure the head, keep hands clear of the mouth, and treat monkfish as alive until proven otherwise. These practices are not signs of fear, but of respect for the animal's design. Where such respect is absent, injuries recur with predictable regularity, reinforcing lessons that biology teaches without explanation. In the end, the monkfish does not need speed, venom, or aggression to be dangerous. It needs only to be underestimated. Its power lies in restraint, in the ability to remain inert until contact occurs, and in jaws that close like machinery rather than muscle alone. For those who work the sea, the monkfish stands as a reminder that death is not the only state that deserves caution, and that some of the ocean's most effective predators look harmless right up until the moment they bite. The green sea turtle moves through coastal waters with a calm that feels earned, gliding over seagrass meadows and reef edges as though time itself has slowed to accommodate its passage. Its broad shell carries scars from decades of travel, algae tracing faint maps of migration routes written in currents and seasons, while powerful flippers beat with steady confidence rather than urgency. This is an animal shaped by longevity, not haste, a grazer and traveler whose life unfolds across entire ocean basins. To encounter one alive is to witness resilience made visible, an organism that survived mass extinctions, shifting continents and changing climates long before humans learned to fish. That history is precisely what makes the final truth so uncomfortable, because despite global protection, cultural reverence and scientific warning, green sea turtles are still eaten in parts of the world, and when they are, the consequences can be devastating in ways that feel both biological and moral. Chelonitoxism is the name given to a form of food poisoning associated with consuming sea turtle meat, and in some cases, eggs. And it occupies a strange and unsettling place in marine science because it does not behave like ordinary food-borne illness. It is rare, unpredictable, and often severe, capable of causing neurological symptoms, organ failure, and death, particularly in children. Unlike bacterial contamination or spoilage, chelonitoxism does not announce itself through taste, smell, or appearance. The meat may look fresh, be prepared carefully, and be consumed as part of a traditional meal, yet still carry toxins that overwhelm the human body hours or days later. This unpredictability is what makes it especially dangerous, because it undermines the assumption that experience or tradition alone can ensure safety. The toxins responsible for chelonitoxism are not fully understood, but evidence suggests they originate from compounds accumulated through the turtle's diet and environment, rather than from the turtle itself. Green sea turtles are primarily herbivores as adults, feeding extensively on seagrasses and algae, while juveniles have more varied diets that include invertebrates. This grazing lifestyle exposes them to a wide array of bioactive compounds produced by marine organisms, including algae and cyanobacteria that generate potent toxins as chemical defenses. Over time, these compounds can accumulate in turtle tissues, particularly in fat and organs, without causing harm to the turtle itself. What the turtle tolerates, however, the human body often cannot. Unlike fast-growing fish, green sea turtles are slow to mature, taking decades to reach reproductive age. This long lifespan increases the likelihood of bioaccumulation, integrating years of environmental chemistry into muscle and organ tissue. The turtle becomes a living archive of the ecosystems it passed through, carrying chemical signatures of polluted coastlines, algal blooms, and degraded reefs. When people consume turtle meat, they are not just eating protein, but ingesting the accumulated history of that animal's environment, including toxins that may have no antidote and no reliable treatment once symptoms appear. Reports of chelonitoxism describe a progression that feels cruel in its delay. Initial symptoms may resemble common gastrointestinal illness, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea, encouraging false reassurance. As time passes, neurological signs emerge, including confusion, weakness, altered consciousness, and in severe cases, seizures or respiratory failure. The toxin appears to affect multiple organ systems, overwhelming the body's ability to compensate. Mortality rates in documented outbreaks have been alarmingly high, especially among children, whose smaller body mass magnifies toxic effects. Survivors may experience long-term complications, making recovery incomplete even when life is spared. What makes chelonitoxism particularly insidious is the lack of consistent patterns. Not everyone who consumes turtle meat in a contaminated meal becomes ill, and among those who do, severity varies widely. This variability fuels dangerous myths that illness strikes only the weak, that proper cooking prevents harm, or that certain parts of the turtle are safe. Scientific evidence does not support these beliefs. Cooking does not reliably destroy the toxins involved, and selective consumption offers no guarantee of safety. The absence of clear rules makes prevention simple in theory, but difficult in practice, because it requires complete avoidance rather than modification. The persistence of turtle consumption despite these risks is rooted in complex cultural, economic, and historical factors. In some communities, turtle meat and eggs have long been associated with celebration, medicine, or survival during times of scarcity. These practices developed before modern conservation awareness and before the scale of turtle population collapse became clear. Today, however, the context has changed dramatically. What was once occasional subsistence harvest has become unsustainable exploitation in many regions, driven by black markets, tourism demand, and declining enforcement. The continuation of consumption is no longer neutral tradition, but a direct threat to species already under pressure. Green sea turtles play a critical ecological role that amplifies the harm of their removal. As grazers, they maintain the health of seagrass beds by preventing overgrowth, promoting nutrient cycling, and enhancing productivity. Healthy seagrass meadows serve as carbon sinks, fish nurseries, and shoreline stabilizers, linking turtle survival to broader ecosystem resilience. Removing turtles disrupts these systems, leading to degraded habitats that support fewer species and provide fewer services to coastal communities. The ecological cost of turtle consumption, therefore, extends far beyond the individual animal, rippling outward through food webs and human economies alike. Egg harvesting compounds this damage by targeting the next generation directly. Green sea turtles exhibit natal homing, returning to the beaches where they were born to lay eggs decades later. Each nest represents not just potential life, but the future of a population already struggling against climate change, coastal development, and bycatch. Removing eggs undermines reproductive success at its most vulnerable point, while offering little nutritional benefit relative to the risk involved. Like meat consumption, eating turtle eggs has been linked to poisoning incidents, reinforcing the reality that no part of the turtle is reliably safe to eat. From a biological perspective, the turtle's tolerance of accumulated toxins highlights a recurring theme in marine ecology that adaptation protects the organism, not its predators. Turtles evolved alongside toxic algae and variable coastal chemistry, developing physiological mechanisms that allow survival where other species might perish. Humans did not evolve within this context, and our vulnerability reflects that mismatch. What is harmless or manageable to a turtle can be catastrophic to us. A reminder that evolutionary success does not translate across species boundaries. The conservation status of green sea turtles underscores the urgency of this issue. Listed as endangered in many parts of their range, they face threats from habitat loss, climate-driven changes in nesting beaches, entanglement in fishing gear, boat strikes, and pollution. Illegal harvest adds pressure to populations that are only just beginning to recover in some regions after decades of decline. Every turtle consumed represents a setback, measured not in years, but in generations, because replacement is slow and uncertain. The emotional weight of this reality forms the core of the gut punch that ends this story. Chelonotoxism is not just a health risk, but a warning signal, an ecological alarm translated into human suffering. It is nature's way of communicating boundaries through consequence, making it clear that some lines should not be crossed. Eating a green sea turtle is not an act without cost, and the cost is paid by ecosystems, communities, and sometimes by the people who believed they were simply following tradition or seeking nourishment. Ending on this truth requires honesty without sensationalism. The green sea turtle is not cursed, and the people who consume it are not inherently malicious. The danger arises from outdated practices colliding with modern realities, from ecosystems pushed beyond balance, and from the mistaken belief that rarity increases value rather than responsibility. The illness that follows turtle consumption is not punishment, but feedback, an unambiguous response from systems that no longer absorb harm quietly. To leave the turtle alive is to preserve something irreplaceable. A traveler older than recorded history, a gardener of the sea, a symbol of endurance that asks for restraint rather than reverence. The final lesson is simple but heavy, because it demands change rather than curiosity. The illegal meal does not just make you sick, it erases futures, both human and non-human, binding health, ethics, and conservation into a single consequence. When the green sea turtle glides away through seagrass and sunlight, the safest, smartest, and most responsible choice is to let it keep going, carrying its long memory forward, rather than turning that memory into a meal that no one truly survives.